I was tightening the silk tie my late wife Beatrice gave me for our 30th anniversary when my phone buzzed against the mahogany dresser. I usually ignore texts when I am getting ready for dinner, but something about the vibration felt urgent. It was Rosenberg, my lawyer and oldest friend. The message was short and chilling. Call me immediately. Do not sign a single piece of paper tonight. Desmond, I mean it. I frowned and dialed his number. His voice was not the calm, measured tone of a man who had practiced law for 40 years. He sounded breathless. Desmond, listen to me carefully. Keisha just faxed a document to my office. She is filing for emergency guardianship. She claims you have advanced Alzheimer's and are a danger to yourself. I stood frozen in my bedroom looking at my reflection in the mirror. I saw a 72-year-old man, a retired civil engineer who could still calculate the load-bearing capacity of a suspension bridge in his head. I did not see a senile invalid. Rosenberg continued. She wants control of the accounts, Desmond. All of them. Tonight is not a dinner. It is an ambush. Go there, but keep your eyes open. And for God's sake, do not drink the wine if it looks like they poured it in the kitchen. I lowered the phone, my hand trembling not from age but from a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. My own daughter. The girl I had carried on my shoulders to see the fireworks on the 4th of July. She was plotting to erase me while I was still alive. I finished tying my tie, smoothing the fabric with deliberate precision. I would go to this dinner. I would eat their food. And I would see exactly how far my flesh and blood was willing to go to sell me out. Before I tell you how I walked into that lion's den and turned their trap against them, I want to know where you are listening from. Let me know in the comments below. And if you have ever had a family member mistake your kindness for weakness, hit that like button and subscribe. You are in the right place. I walked out to my Lincoln Town car parked in the driveway. The evening air in Atlanta was humid and thick. I unlocked the door and slid into the leather seat. The engine purred to life with a reliability that comforted me. Unlike my family, machines did not lie. Machines did not smile at you while holding a dagger behind their back. I pulled out onto the street driving the very roads I had helped design 40 years ago. I knew every curve, every gradient, every drainage system beneath the asphalt. Yet my daughter claimed in a legal document that I could not find my way to the grocery store without supervision. It was laughable if it was not so heartbreaking. As I drove toward the suburbs where Keisha lived, memories flashed through my mind like a slide projector. I remembered a little girl with braided hair who used to sit on my lap while I reviewed blueprints. She would ask Daddy, why do bridges not fall down? And I would tell her, because they have a strong foundation, baby girl. Just like this family. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Where had that foundation cracked? I knew the answer. It cracked the day she brought Brad home. Brad, my son-in-law, a man who wore suits that were too shiny and spoke in buzzwords he did not understand. He called himself an entrepreneur, but in 10 years I had never seen him build anything except debt. He was always chasing the next big thing. Crypto, AI, startups, flipping houses with money he did not have. He looked at me not as a father, but as a bank vault with a pulse. And Keisha, my sweet Keisha. She had let his greed infect her. She had traded her integrity for the illusion of a high society life she could not afford. I reached the gated community where they lived. The irony was bitter. I had paid the 40% down payment for that house. I wrote the check the week after Beatrice's funeral, thinking I was securing my daughter's future. I did not know I was financing the headquarters of my enemies. I pulled up to the driveway. The house was lit up like a Christmas tree. Through the large bay window I could see them. Brad was pacing back and forth holding a glass of wine. Keisha was setting the table. They looked like a picture-perfect couple. But I knew better. I knew they were actors preparing for a performance. I checked my rearview mirror one last time. My eyes were clear. My mind was sharp. They expected a confused old man to walk through that door. A man they could manipulate. A man they could bully into signing away his freedom. They were in for a surprise. I was not bringing confusion to this dinner. I was bringing clarity. The cold, hard clarity of a man who had nothing left to lose. I stepped out of the car and locked it. The sound of the lock clicking echoed in the silence of the street. It sounded like the chamber of a gun being loaded. I walked up the path to the front door. I did not knock. I rang the bell. Once. Firmly. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the manicured lawn I paid for. Tonight was going to be interesting. Tonight I would find out if my daughter was truly gone, or if there was anything left of the little girl who loved bridges. But I was prepared for the worst. I touched the inside pocket of my jacket where I kept my pen. They wanted a signature. I would give them something else entirely. The door opened. Brad stood there. He forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Hey, Desmond. Come on in," he said. His voice was too loud, too cheerful. It was the voice of a salesman trying to close a bad deal. I stepped over the threshold. The trap was set. And I had just walked right into the center of it. The air inside the house smelled of lavender air freshener and hidden agendas. I stepped onto the Brazilian cherry wood floors that I knew cost $12 a square foot because I was the one who signed the check for them 3 years ago. Back then, Keisha had hugged me and said I was the best father in the world. Now she was in the kitchen, and the only greeting I received was the roar of the television. Brad was sprawled on the Italian leather sectional sofa. He did not stand up. He did not turn around. He did not mute the volume. His eyes were locked on a football game. A player on the screen made a tackle, and Brad punched the air with a fist that had never known a day of hard labor. "Touchdown, baby," he screamed, taking a swig from a bottle of imported beer. I stood there in the entryway, clutching my hat. I cleared my throat. "Good evening, Brad." He turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge my existence, but not enough to show respect. "Oh, hey, Desmond. Didn't hear you come in. Grab a seat anywhere. The game is almost over." I looked at the empty spot on the sofa next to him. It was covered in betting slips and empty snack wrappers. I chose a stiff wooden chair in the corner instead. I sat down and watched him. I analyzed him the way I used to analyze a structural defect in a retaining wall. Brad was a man built on a sinkhole. He wore a watch that cost more than my first car, but I knew for a fact he was 2 months behind on his car payments. He projected success, but he smelled of panic. Keisha emerged from the kitchen carrying a platter. She was wearing a dress that I recognized from a designer catalog. It cost enough to feed a family of 4 for a month. She flashed a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Dinner is ready, Daddy," she announced. "We made your favorite steak." I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. Keisha knew I had dental implants. She knew that since my surgery last year, I had trouble chewing tough meats. I had told her specifically that I preferred fish or stew. But as we moved to the dining room table, I saw what was waiting for me. It was a slab of beef that looked more like a shoe sole than a meal. It was gray, overcooked, and dry. Beside it sat a glass of red wine. I picked up the bottle sitting on the table. It was a brand sold at gas stations for $5. I looked at Brad's glass. He was drinking a reserve Cabernet. They were not just feeding me. They were testing me. They were seeing how much indignity I would swallow. I sat down. I picked up my knife and fork. I saw Keisha watching me from the corner of her eye. She was waiting for me to complain. If I complained, I was a grumpy old man. If I struggled to cut the meat, I was a frail invalid. It was a lose-lose scenario. So I did neither. I cut a piece of the leather on my plate. It took effort. My wrist ached. I put it in my mouth and chewed. I chewed with the stoic determination of a man who had survived Jim Crow laws and 40 years of construction sites. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me wince. "So Desmond," Brad said, finally muting the TV as he sat down. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask about my garden. He went straight to the only thing he cared about: money. "The market is brutal right now. Just brutal. My real estate portfolio is taking a hit. But I have an in with this new AI startup in Silicon Valley. It is going to be the next big thing. Guaranteed 10 times return." I took a sip of the vinegar they called wine. "Is that so?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Yeah," Brad continued, his eyes gleaming with greed. "We just need a little liquidity to buy in before the IPO. It is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You know smart money never sleeps, Desmond. You have to move assets to make assets." He was using buzzwords he had learned from YouTube videos. I knew his type. He was a gambler who thought he was an investor. Keisha chimed in, interrupting him. She reached across the table and touched my arm. Her touch felt scripted. "Daddy, are you listening to Brad? You look a little glazed over. Are you feeling okay?" "I am fine, Keisha," I said. "I am just chewing." "You know," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "I was so worried about you driving over here tonight. The roads are so complicated now with all the construction. Did you get lost? Be honest." I put down my fork. The metal clinked against the china. "I did not get lost, Keisha. I drove the same route I have driven for 20 years. I could drive it blindfolded." Brad laughed a short, sharp sound. That is what you say, Desmond. But Keisha told me you called her last week thinking it was 1995. I stared at him. I had never made such a call. They were rewriting my history in real time. They were building a narrative of decline brick by brick. I never called you last week, Keisha, I said, my voice firm. She sighed a dramatic, heavy sigh. See? You don't even remember calling me. That is exactly what Dr. Evans warned us about. Memory gaps, confusion, denial. The gaslighting was thick enough to choke on. They were trying to make me doubt my own mind. If I defended myself, I was being defensive and confused. If I stayed silent, I was admitting defeat. I looked around the room. I saw the expensive curtains, the crystal chandelier, the life I had helped pay for. And I realized I was not a guest here. I was a target. Brad wiped his mouth with a napkin. He exchanged a look with Keisha. A signal. It was time. Look, Desmond. Brad said, his tone shifting from casual to serious. We need to be realistic. You are 72. You are living alone in that big old house. It is dangerous. What if you leave the stove on again? What if you fall down the stairs? I have never left the stove on, I said, grinding my teeth. Keisha ignored me. We love you too much to watch you deteriorate, Daddy. We have been looking into options, places where you can be safe, places where you can be with people your own age. Brad reached under the table. He pulled out a thick, heavy folder. He placed it on the table between the untouched salad and the cheap wine. The sound of the paper hitting the wood echoed like a judge's gavel. On the cover of the folder, printed in gold letters, were the words Golden Horizon Senior Living Community. I looked at the brochure. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. I knew Golden Horizon. I knew it was a facility that had been cited 3 times last year for health code violations. I knew it was where people sent their parents when they wanted to forget them. It was a warehouse for the dying. This isn't a discussion, Desmond, Brad said, leaning forward. This is an intervention. We think it is time. Actually, we know it is time. We have already spoken to the intake director. They have a bed opening up tomorrow. Keisha squeezed my hand harder. Her nails dug into my skin. It is for your own good, Daddy. You will love it there. They have bingo. They have a garden. And the best part is, Brad and I can handle all your stress. We will take over the house. We will manage the bills. You won't have to worry about a thing. I looked from Keisha to Brad. I saw the hunger in their eyes. They didn't care about my safety. They didn't care about bingo. They wanted the house. They wanted the accounts. They wanted me out of the way so they could drain my legacy to fund their lifestyle. I looked at the steak on my plate. Cold, tough, inedible. Just like the lie they were trying to feed me. I reached out and took the folder. My hand did not shake. I opened it. The first page was an application form. The second page was a contract transferring power of attorney to Keisha. I looked up at them. My face was a mask of calm, but inside I was screaming. You want me to sign this? I asked softly. Tonight, Brad said, handing me a pen. The same pen he had probably used to sign his bad loans. The offer expires at midnight, Desmond. If you don't take this room, you might end up on a waiting list for years. I held the pen. I felt the weight of it. It was lighter than a shovel, but it could dig a grave just as deep. They thought I was trapped. They thought I was a confused old man cornered by his loving family. But they forgot one thing. I was an engineer. And an engineer never signs off on a project without inspecting the foundation first. I am feeling very tired, I said, letting my shoulders slump. The drive here must have taken more out of me than I thought. Keisha's eyes lit up. See? I told you. You are exhausted. Just sign it, Daddy, and you can go home and sleep. We will handle the movers in the morning. I closed the folder. I need my reading glasses, I said. I left them in the car. Brad stood up. I will get them. No, I said. My voice commanded the room. No, I need the fresh air. I will go. I stood up. I walked toward the door. I could feel their eyes on my back. They were celebrating already. They thought they had won. But as I reached for the door handle, I knew the real game was just beginning. And I was about to change the rules. I opened the folder. The glossy brochure inside smelled of fresh ink and desperation. On the cover was a stock photo of a smiling nurse holding the hand of an elderly woman who looked like she had just won the lottery. Golden Horizon Senior Living, the text promised. A sanctuary for your golden years. I stared at the address printed at the bottom of the page, 4500 Industrial Parkway. My heart didn't sink, it hardened. I knew this building. I knew it intimately. 10 years ago, I was hired as an independent contractor to inspect the structural integrity of that very facility. It wasn't a sanctuary. It was a converted motel from the 70s sitting on a floodplain. The drywall was full of black mold painted over with cheap beige latex. The ventilation system was a breeding ground for Legionnaire's disease. And the garden, they advertised, was a patch of synthetic grass next to a chemical processing plant. It was the cheapest, filthiest facility in the state. A place where the state warehoused the indigent and the unwanted. And this was where my daughter wanted to put me. Not because she couldn't afford better, but because she didn't care. To her, I was just inventory that needed to be stored in the cheapest warehouse available. I looked up from the brochure. I let my hand tremble. It was a performance I had never thought I would have to give. I made my lower lip quiver just a fraction. Keisha, I stammered, my voice sounding thin and frail. This place, it looks very fancy. Is it expensive? I don't want to be a burden. Keisha reached across the table and covered my shaking hand with hers. Her skin was warm, but her eyes were reptilian. Oh, Daddy, don't worry about the cost. We just want you safe. That is all that matters. I pulled my hand back slowly as if I was confused. But why the rush, baby girl? I am doing fine at the house. The garden is blooming. I just fixed the porch swing last week. Why do I need to leave tomorrow? And then came the performance of a lifetime. Keisha's eyes filled with tears. They welled up instantly, shimmering under the chandelier light. If I didn't know better, I would have been moved. But I saw the effort behind them. I saw the muscle twitch in her cheek as she forced the water out. Because you are not fine, Daddy. She choked out a sob, escaping her throat. We didn't want to tell you because we didn't want to upset you, but yesterday was the final straw. I frowned, genuinely curious to see what lie she would construct. Yesterday? What happened yesterday? You left the gas on, she whispered dramatically. The neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, called me in a panic. She smelled gas all the way from her porch. I had to rush over there with a spare key. The stove was running full blast and you... She paused for effect, wiping a tear from her cheek. You were sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the wall, completely catatonic. You didn't even know I was there. I turned off the gas and sat with you for an hour, but you just kept asking for Mom. The room went silent. Brad shook his head, looking down at his plate as if the tragedy was too much for him to bear. It was a masterpiece of fiction. A perfect lie. But there was a crack in the foundation, a fatal structural flaw. I am a civil engineer. I spent 40 years calculating risk and safety protocols. My life is a series of checklists. Every night before I go upstairs, I check the front door locks, I check the thermostat, and I check the stove. I touch every dial. I ensure they are in the off position. It is muscle memory. It is religion. And yesterday, Mrs. Higgins was not even in town. She is in Florida visiting her sister. I know this because I collected her mail for her. Keisha was not just lying about an event. She was trying to dismantle my reality. She was gaslighting me. She wanted me to believe that my mind was rotting so that I would surrender my autonomy without a fight. It is the cruelest thing you can do to a human being, to make them doubt their own sanity. I felt a cold fury rising in my chest. It was hotter than any fire she claimed I started, but I pushed it down. I buried it deep under layers of concrete discipline. If I exploded now, if I called her a liar, they would use my anger as proof of my dementia. See, look how aggressive he is. He is unstable. So I played the part. I let my shoulders drop. I looked down at my hands. I looked like a man who had just been told he had a terminal illness. I did that, I whispered. I don't remember that. That is the scary part, Desmond Brad said, speaking with his mouth full of potato. You don't remember. That is why you need professional help. We can't watch you 24/7. Golden Horizon can. He tapped the folder again. The sound was irritating like a leaking faucet. I took a deep breath. I reached for the folder. I pulled it toward me. Okay, I said, sounding defeated. If you say so, if Mrs. Higgins called you, then it must be true. Keisha exhaled a long breath of relief. She smiled through her tears. Thank you, Daddy. Thank you for being reasonable. You are doing the right thing. I closed the folder and tucked it under my arm. But this is a big decision, I said, standing up slowly, holding on to the table for support. I need to read the contract. I want to see the rules. I will take this home tonight, read it over with a cup of tea, and I will call you in the morning to sign. I made a move to turn away. I wanted to get out of that toxic air. I wanted to get to my car where I could breathe. But I didn't make it 2 steps. Brad's hand shot out. It clamped onto my forearm. His grip was tight, too tight. It wasn't the touch of a son. It was the grip of a jailer. "Whoa, hold on there, Desmond," he said, his voice losing its fake warmth. He stood up, towering over me. He used his height to intimidate. He snatched the folder from under my arm and slammed it back onto the table. "You don't understand," he said, his eyes hard and flat. "We don't have until morning. This is a special rate. A friends and family discount I pulled strings to get. The intake director said if the paperwork isn't signed and faxed by midnight, the spot goes to someone else." He pushed the pen into my chest. It poked against my shirt. "You are not going home to read anything. You are signing this now. Tonight. We are not letting you leave this house until we know you are safe." I looked at the pen. Then I looked at Keisha. She was no longer crying. She was watching me, her face cold and expectant. She wasn't my daughter anymore. She was an accomplice. They were not asking me. They were holding me hostage. I looked at the folder again, and then I looked at Brad. "Is that so?" I asked. My voice was no longer shaking. "Yes, that is so," Brad hissed, leaning into my face. He smelled of stale beer and arrogance. "Sign the paper, Desmond. Don't make this difficult." I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 8:15. The trap had snapped shut, or so they thought. I slowly reached out and took the pen. Brad smirked. He thought he had broken me. He thought the fear of being crazy was enough to make me surrender. But he forgot one thing. When you build a bridge, you always build an emergency exit. And I was about to use mine. I looked at the pen in my hand. It was a cheap ballpoint with a chewed cap. Brad was hovering over me like a vulture waiting for the carcass to stop twitching. The air in the room felt heavy and suffocating. They thought they had me cornered. They thought the pressure of the expiring offer and the threat of my own alleged incompetence would force my hand. I placed the pen gently on the table. The click of plastic against wood was soft, but in that silent room it sounded like a gunshot. "No," I said. The word hung in the air. Keisha blinked. Brad's jaw tightened. "What do you mean, no?" Brad asked, his voice dropping to a low growl. "I mean, no," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I am not signing a legal document at 8:30 at night after a glass of wine without my reading glasses and without my lawyer reviewing it first. That is not how I conducted business for 40 years, and that is not how I am going to start now." Brad's face turned a shade of red that clashed with his expensive shirt. He slammed his hand down on the table, making the silverware jump. "This isn't business, Desmond," he shouted. "This is your life. We are trying to save you from yourself. You are being stubborn and selfish." I sat back in my chair, crossing my arms. "I am being prudent, Brad. There is a difference." Brad let out a harsh, cruel laugh. "Prudent. You think you are still the big shot engineer, don't you? You think because you poured some concrete in the 80s, you are still in charge. Look at you. You are shaking. You are confused. You are an old man who can't even remember to turn off a stove." He leaned in closer, and I smelled the stale beer on his breath. I also smelled something else. Contempt. Deep-seated, ugly contempt. "You people are all the same," he muttered. "Too proud to admit when you are finished. You want to hold on to everything until it rots. Well, I am not going to let you drag Keisha down with you. You are going to that home whether you sign this or not. We will get a court order if we have to. We will declare you incompetent." I looked at Keisha, waiting for her to defend me, waiting for her to tell her husband not to speak to her father that way. But she just looked down at her fingernails, picking at a loose thread on the tablecloth. Her silence was louder than his shouting. "It was the phrase 'you people' that did it. It wasn't explicit, but I heard the dog whistle. I saw the way he looked at my calloused hands that had worked harder in one day than he had in his entire life. He didn't just see an old man. He saw a man he felt superior to, and he hated that I held the keys to the wealth he felt entitled to. I wanted to stand up and knock him out. I wanted to tell him that I had forgotten more about responsibility than he would ever know. But I remembered Rosenberg's advice. Don't sign. Keep your eyes open. Get out. If I fought him now, he would call the police. He would say I became violent. It would fit perfectly into their narrative of my dementia. So I reached for my temple instead. I squeezed my eyes shut and let out a low groan. "Oh God," I whispered, letting my voice tremble. Keisha's head snapped up. "Daddy, what is it?" "My head," I gasped, swaying slightly in the chair. "It feels like a spike is being driven through my skull. The lights, they are too bright." I grabbed the edge of the table as if I was about to collapse. Keisha jumped up, knocking her chair over. "Brad, is he having a stroke? Oh my God, Daddy, breathe." Brad looked annoyed rather than concerned. He stepped back, looking at me with suspicion. "He is fine, Keisha. He is just stalling." "I am not stalling." I groaned, closing my eyes tighter. "I need to lie down. I need my medicine. It is at home. Please, I can't think." "The pain." Keisha rushed to my side, grabbing my arm. "We need to take him to the hospital." "No," Brad barked. "If we go to the hospital, we miss the deadline for the nursing home. Just give him some water." "No hospital," I wheezed. "I just need to go home. My pills are on the nightstand. I just need to sleep. We will talk in the morning. I promise." Keisha looked at Brad pleadingly. "We can't force him to sign if he is in pain, Brad. Look at him. He is pale." I held my breath, making my face flush. I was an engineer, not an actor, but desperation is a powerful teacher. "Fine," Brad spat, throwing his hands up. "Fine. Go home. Take your pills." "But I am coming over first thing in the morning, Desmond, and I am bringing the papers. Do not think you are getting out of this." I nodded weakly. "I will sign in the morning," I whispered. "I just need the pain to stop." I stood up, leaning heavily on Keisha. She walked me to the door. I could feel her shaking. Whether it was fear for my health or fear of losing the deal, I did not know. Probably a mix of both. "Drive safe, Daddy," she said as I reached the car. "Text me when you get in." I didn't answer. I just slumped into the driver's seat and closed the door. As soon as the heavy metal door clicked shut, I let out a long breath. The headache vanished instantly. My posture straightened. I looked in the rearview mirror. My eyes were clear. My hands were steady. I started the engine and pulled away from the curb. I drove slowly until I turned the corner and was out of their sight. Then I pulled over under a street lamp. My heart was pounding not from fear but from adrenaline. I had escaped the lion's den, but I knew the hunt was far from over. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. It was a high-end model, fully encrypted. People assume seniors only use flip phones, but I have been working with complex schematics and digital interfaces for decades. My house was a smart home. I had sensors on the windows, motion detectors in the hallway, and high-definition cameras in every common room. I opened the security app. The screen glowed in the dark car. I scrolled through the event log. Motion detected. Living room. 7:45 p.m. I froze. 7:45. That was exactly when I was cutting into that piece of shoe leather steak at Keisha's table. That was when she was asking me if I remembered the way to her house. I tapped the video file. The feed loaded. It showed my living room, the sanctuary where Beatrice and I had raised our daughter. The room was dark, but the night vision on the camera was crisp. The front door opened. I saw a figure walk in. It wasn't a burglar. It was a man in a suit carrying a laser measuring device and a tablet. He didn't break in. He used a key. He walked confidently into the center of the room. He pointed the laser at the walls, measuring the dimensions. He tapped notes into his tablet. Then he did something that made my stomach turn. He walked over to the fireplace. He picked up a framed photo of Beatrice and me taken on our honeymoon. He looked at it for a second, then placed it face down on the mantelpiece, as if we were already ghosts, as if we didn't matter. Then another figure entered the frame. It was a woman. She was wearing a realtor blazer. She was on the phone. "Yeah, I am inside now," she said. Her voice was tinny through the camera microphone, but clear enough. "The layout is great. Solid bones. The owner is moving into a facility tomorrow, so we can list it as vacant by Monday. We should price it for a quick cash sale. The son-in-law said they need the liquidity fast." I sat there in my car, under the yellow light of the street lamp, and watched strangers auctioning off my life while I was still living it. They hadn't just planned to sell the house. They had already hired the agents. They had already handed over the keys. The dinner tonight wasn't a negotiation, it was a distraction. They needed me out of the house so the agents could get the measurements for the listing. The emergency at the nursing home wasn't real. The only emergency was Brad's debt and their greed. I watched the agent walk into my kitchen. My kitchen. He opened the refrigerator. He shook his head at my leftovers. He was judging my existence. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of mourning. I was mourning the death of my daughter. The Keisha I knew was gone. She had not just betrayed me, she had handed the keys to my kingdom to wolves. I closed the app. The screen went black, but the image of Beatrice's photo being turned face down burned in my mind. They wanted a war. They wanted to treat me like a senile old fool who could be discarded. I put the car in gear. The engine roared to life, a deep, powerful sound. I was not going home to take medicine. I was going home to change the locks. And then I was going to make a phone call that would bring their entire house of cards crashing down. Brad thought he was smart. He thought he was playing chess with a pigeon. But he forgot that I built the board he was playing on. And tomorrow morning when he showed up with his papers, he was going to find out that the game had changed. I drove into the night, my grip on the steering wheel tight enough to bend steel. The headache was fake, but the reckoning was going to be very, very real. I did not sleep that night. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling fan, tracing the rotation of the blades. Round and round, just like the thoughts in my head. They had measured my house. They had listed it. They had turned my wife's photo face down. When the sun rose, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and orange. I was already dressed. I put on my navy blue Sunday suit. It was the suit I wore to church and to funerals. Today felt like a little bit of both. I polished my shoes until I could see the reflection of a man who was done being a victim. I skipped breakfast. My stomach was a knot of cold iron. I grabbed my leather briefcase, the one I used to carry to construction sites. It used to hold blueprints for bridges. Today it would hold the blueprints of my revenge. I drove to the bank. It was the same branch I had banked with since 1982. I knew the manager, I knew the tellers, I knew the security guard who always asked me about the Braves game. It was a place of stability in a changing world, or so I thought. I walked in at 9 a.m. sharp. The air conditioning was humming, the smell of stale coffee and money hung in the air. I walked up to the counter. Mrs. Gable was there. She was a sweet woman with silver hair who always gave me a lollipop for my grandkids, even though I told her they were grown. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," she said, smiling. Her smile faltered when she saw my face. I wasn't wearing my usual grin. My eyes were hidden behind dark sunglasses. "Good morning, Mrs. Gable," I said. My voice was low and steady. "I need to make a withdrawal." She nodded, typing into her computer. "Of course. How much would you like today?" $5,000, I said. I want it in cash. Her fingers danced over the keys, then stopped. She frowned. She hit the enter key again. Then she looked up at me. Her face had gone pale. "Mr. Cole," she whispered, "there is a problem." "What kind of problem, Mrs. Gable?" She lowered her voice, leaning over the counter. "The system. It says your account is locked. It has been flagged for suspicious activity by the Guardian." The word hung in the air like a foul odor. "Guardian. I don't have a guardian, Mrs. Gable," I said, gripping the marble counter. "I am standing right here. I am the account holder." She looked nervous. She glanced at the manager's office. "I know, Mr. Cole, but the system says a power of attorney was filed. It grants full control to a Mrs. Keisha King Miller. It says," she swallowed hard, "it says you have been deemed incapacitated." Incapacitated. The word felt like a slap. My own daughter had not just tried to trick me, she had legally declared me a vegetable. And Mr. Cole, Mrs. Gable continued, her voice trembling. "It shows a disbursement. A home equity line of credit was opened yesterday. $200,000. My knees felt weak, but I locked them. I forced myself to stand tall like a steel beam. "Where did the money go, Mrs. Gable?" She clicked a few more keys. It was wired to a joint account, under the names Keisha King Miller and Brad Miller. I closed my eyes behind my sunglasses. $200,000. They hadn't just listed the house, they had leveraged it. They had stripped the equity out of the walls I built. They stole my retirement, my safety net, and my dignity in one keystroke. Mrs. Gable looked like she wanted to cry. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, "did you authorize this?" I opened my eyes. I looked at this woman who had known me for 20 years. I could scream. I could demand to see the manager. I could cause a scene that would bring the police. But noise is not power. Noise is panic. And I was not panicking. I was calculating. If I made a scene now, the bank would freeze everything. They would call Keisha. She would spin her story about my dementia. She would say, "See, I told you he gets agitated." It would only validate her lies. Number one, I needed proof. I needed the paper trail. "I authorize you to print everything, Mrs. Gable," I said. My voice was so calm it frightened me. I want a copy of the power of attorney they filed. I want the transaction history for the last 6 months. I want the wire transfer confirmation. Print it all. But Mr. Cole, if this is fraud, we should call. Just print it. Mrs. Gable, I interrupted gently. Please, for old time's sake. She nodded. The printer whirred to life. It churned out page after page of betrayal. I watched the paper stack up. Each sheet was a nail in the coffin of my relationship with my daughter. She handed me the stack. I flipped to the power of attorney. There it was. My signature. Desmond Otis Cole. It looked perfect. The loops of the D, the sharp slant of the C. To the untrained eye, it was authentic. But I looked closer. I held it up to the light. When I sign my name, I always lift the pen slightly between the O and the T in Otis. It is a habit from drafting school. A tiny microscopic break in the ink. This signature flowed without a break. It was traced. They had used a lightbox or a digital pad. They had copied my signature from an old birthday card or a check. It was a forgery, a felony, and the date. It was dated 3 weeks ago. They didn't decide to put me in a home last night because of a stove incident. They had executed this plan a month ago. The dinner, the fake concern, the gaslighting about the stove, it was all theater. They had already stolen the money. They just needed me physically out of the house so they could sell the shell that was left. I felt a coldness settle in my chest. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was the cold void where a father's love used to be. Thank you, Mrs. Gable, I said, placing the documents into my briefcase. Mr. Cole, she asked, her eyes wide. What are you going to do? I snapped the briefcase shut. The sound echoed in the quiet bank. I am going to handle some family business, I said. I walked out of the bank. The sun was shining brighter now, but I felt like I was walking through a thunderstorm. I got into my car and threw the briefcase on the passenger seat. I looked at it. That leather bag contained enough evidence to send my daughter and son-in-law to federal prison for 10 years. Bank fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, elder abuse. I could drive to the police station right now. I could end this. But that was too easy. Prison was just a room with bars. I wanted them to feel what I felt. I wanted them to feel the ground crumble beneath their feet. I wanted them to think they had won right up until the moment the roof collapsed on their heads. I remembered what I told Keisha when she was a little girl learning to ride a bike. If you don't respect gravity, gravity will teach you a lesson. They had disrespected the gravity of who I was. Now I was going to be the lesson. I started the car. I didn't go to the police. I didn't go home. I drove toward downtown, toward a glass building that housed the sharpest legal mind in Atlanta. Rosenberg was waiting, and I had a lot of reading to do. But first I needed to make one stop. I pulled into a hardware store. I walked to the aisle with the padlocks and chains. I bought the heaviest industrial-grade padlock they had. The clerk looked at me. Heavy-duty job, he asked. You have no idea, I said. I wasn't just locking a gate. I was locking away the part of me that used to forgive. That part of Desmond Cole was dead. The man who walked out of that store was a stranger to mercy. I got back in the car. My phone buzzed. It was Keisha. Daddy, are you up? Brad is coming over with the papers. Don't forget our deal. I looked at the text. Our deal. I typed back. I am ready. Come over. I put the phone down. I wasn't lying. I was ready. I was more ready than I had ever been in my life. Silence is the loudest thunder, and the storm was about to break. The elevator doors opened onto the 12th floor of the First National Building. The air up here was different. It didn't smell of cleaning chemicals or cheap ambition. It smelled of mahogany leather and old money. This was the domain of Saul Rosenberg. We had been friends since 1975, when I was a young contractor fighting for payment on a city job, and he was a young lawyer fighting for respect. We bonded over a shared hatred of bullies. 50 years later, that bond was the only thing standing between me and total ruin. His secretary, Martha, nodded to me as I walked in. She didn't ask for my name. She just pressed the intercom button. Mr. Cole is here, Saul. Send him in. The voice crackled back. I opened the heavy oak door. Rosenberg was sitting behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from the hull of a pirate ship. The room was dim, lit by brass lamps with green glass shades. Walls lined with law books that had seen more cases than most judges. A thick cloud of cigar smoke hung near the ceiling, defying the building's strict non-smoking policy. Saul Rosenberg did not care about policies. He made them. He stood up when I entered. He was short-balding and looked like a kindly grandfather. But I knew better. In a courtroom, he was a great white shark in a three-piece suit. "Desmond," he said, bypassing the handshake to grip my shoulder. "You look like hell." "I feel like it." "Saul," I said, dropping my briefcase onto his desk. "Sit down. Do you want a drink?" "No. I want you to look at this." I opened the briefcase and slid the stack of bank documents across the polished wood. Rosenberg put on his spectacles. He sat down and began to read. The room was silent except for the ticking of a grandfather clock and the rustle of paper. I watched his face. I saw his eyebrows knit together. I saw his jaw clench. Then I saw his face turn a shade of red I had rarely seen. He slammed the file shut. Dust motes danced in the lamplight. "This is not just theft, Desmond," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is federal bank fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, and since you are over 65, it is aggravated elder abuse." He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him and started scribbling furiously. "I can have a federal marshal at their door in an hour," he said without looking up. "We freeze the assets. We arrest them. With this paper trail, they won't get bail. They will be looking at 10 to 15 years minimum. Brad will cry like a baby in federal prison." He looked up at me, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. "Say the word, Desmond. Just say the word and I will destroy them by lunchtime." I looked at the window. Outside, the Atlanta skyline was gleaming in the sun. Bridges I built, roads I paved, everything out there was built on a foundation of rules and consequences. But prison felt too simple. Prison was just a cage. It didn't teach you anything except how to count days. Brad and Keisha were not just criminals. They were ungrateful. They were arrogant. They believed they were smarter than me. They believed I was a resource to be mined, not a father to be respected. If I sent them to jail now, they would play the victim. They would tell everyone that their mean old father misunderstood a financial arrangement and pressed charges. They would never understand the gravity of what they did. "No, Saul," I said. Rosenberg stopped writing. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "Number Desmond, they stole $200,000. They are trying to put you in a rat-hole nursing home." "I know," I said, leaning back in the leather chair. "But if we arrest them now, it is just a legal battle. It is messy. It is public. And honestly, Saul, it is too quick." I tapped my fingers on the armrest. "I don't want to just punish them," I said. "I want to teach them." Rosenberg put his pen down. He leaned back, crossing his arms. He knew that tone. It was the same tone I used when I found a contractor using cheap cement on a bridge pylon. I didn't just fire the contractor. I made him chip out every ounce of bad concrete by hand. "What do you have in mind, Desmond?" "I want the lesson plan," I said. Rosenberg's eyes widened slightly. Then a slow grin spread across his face. It wasn't a nice grin. It was the grin of a wolf seeing a wounded deer. "The lesson plan. We haven't used that since the construction union dispute of '98. It is time I said." I leaned forward. "Here is the thing, Saul. They think they have won. They think I am a confused old man who is scared of his own shadow. They think I am going to sign those papers today because I have no other choice. So let them believe it." Rosenberg nodded slowly, catching on. "You want to play the rabbit?" "Exactly. I want to give them exactly what they want. I will sign the papers. I will let them drive me to that hellhole nursing home. I will let them take the keys to my house. I will let them think they are the kings of the world." And then Rosenberg asked, "And then when they are at their highest point, when they are popping the champagne and laughing at the stupid old man, I want you to pull the rug out. Not just the rug. I want you to pull the floor, the foundation, and the earth beneath them." Rosenberg chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "You want the irrevocable trust strategy, don't you?" I nodded. "The house, the land, the accounts, everything. It was never mine to give, was it, Saul?" "Technically no," Rosenberg said, tapping his temple. "Since Beatrice passed, we moved everything into the Cole family trust. You are just the trustee with lifetime usage rights. You don't own the title personally." Which means, I said, finishing his sentence. "Any power of attorney Keisha has is useless for selling the property. She can't sell what I don't own. And any loan Brad took out against the house is invalid because he mortgaged a property that belongs to a trust, not to me." Rosenberg laughed out loud now. He lit a cigar, puffing a cloud of blue smoke into the air. "Oh, that is beautiful. It is nasty, Desmond. It is really nasty. When the bank finds out the collateral for that loan doesn't exist legally, they will call the note immediately. Brad will have 24 hours to pay back 200 grand or face felony fraud charges. And since they already spent some of it," I added. "They can't pay it back." "Exactly," Rosenberg said. "They will be destitute. They will lose their own house, their cars, everything." He looked at me with a newfound respect. "You are a cold man, Desmond Cole." "They killed the warm man last night, Saul," I said, when they turned Beatrice's picture face down. Rosenberg opened a drawer and pulled out a fresh file. "Okay, let's set the stage. If we are going to do this, we need to do it right. I need to draft a dummy admission agreement for the nursing home, something that looks official but isn't worth the paper it is printed on. And I need to draft a fake power of attorney acceptance letter. Can you have it ready in an hour?" I asked. Rosenberg scoffed. "I can have it ready in 20 minutes. But you have the hard part. You have to go back there. You have to look them in the eye and lie. You have to be the frail, defeated old man one last time. Can you do that?" I thought about the actor I had to become. It went against every fiber of my being. I was a man of truth. I built straight roads. I spoke straight words. But for Keisha and Brad, I would become a winding path full of hidden cliffs. "I can do it," I said, standing up. "I will call Keisha now. I will tell her I am ready to surrender." Rosenberg handed me the phone. "Make it good," he said. I dialed my daughter's number. My hand was steady. My heart was ice. Keisha answered on the first ring. She must have been staring at the phone. "Daddy, did you sleep well?" she asked. Her voice was dripping with fake sweetness. I cleared my throat, making it sound rough and tired. "No, baby girl. I didn't sleep at all. My head is spinning. I can't do this anymore." "Do what, Daddy? I can't live alone." "You were right. The stove, the confusion. I am scared, Keisha." I heard her muffling the phone, probably whispering to Brad. "He is cracking." "Oh, Daddy," she said back to me. "It is okay to be scared. That is why we are here. Did you make a decision?" I let out a long, shaky sigh. "Yes. Bring the papers. I am at the house. I just want to rest. I just want to go to the place you found. The Golden Horizon. It sounds nice." "It is wonderful, Daddy," she said. "We are coming right now. Don't go anywhere." I hung up. I looked at Rosenberg. He was smiling through the smoke. "Showtime," he said. I picked up my briefcase. I felt lighter. The burden of sadness was gone, replaced by the clarity of the mission. "I am going home to pack a bag, Saul," I said. "Just a small one. Enough for a weekend trip." "Where are you going?" Rosenberg asked. "To hell," I said. "I am going to walk into hell so I can lock the door behind them when I leave." I walked out of the office. The elevator ride down felt faster than the ride up. I stepped out into the bright Atlanta sun. The city was noisy and chaotic, but inside my head there was only silence. The silence of a bridge just before the dynamite goes off. They were coming to collect their prize, but they didn't know the prize was rigged with explosives. I got into my car and drove toward the house that was no longer a home. It was a stage, and the final act was about to begin. I sat in my wingback chair in the living room, the same chair where I had read bedtime stories to Keisha 30 years ago. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that happens before a tornado touches down. My small overnight bag was packed, sitting by the door. Inside was a change of clothes, my toiletries, and a framed photo of Beatrice. It was a prop, but it was also my anchor. I needed her watching over me for what I was about to do. I looked at the clock on the mantelpiece. It had been 12 minutes since I hung up the phone. They must have broken every speed limit in Atlanta to get here. I heard the screech of tires in the driveway. It wasn't the slow, respectful arrival of a grieving family coming to help a sick elder. It was the aggressive arrival of thieves coming to claim their loot. Car doors slammed, voices raised in excitement, not concern. I slumped down in the chair. I messed up my hair, letting it look unkempt. I loosened my tie until it hung crooked around my neck. I practiced the tremor in my hands. I had to look like a man who had finally broken under the weight of his own confusion. The front door flew open. They didn't even knock. They had the spare key, the one I pretended I didn't know they had. Daddy Keisha's voice rang out. It was too loud, too bright. "Daddy, where are you?" "I am in here," I called out, my voice raspy and weak. They rushed into the living room, And that was when I saw it, the detail that made my stomach turn over. Brad was carrying a bottle of champagne. It was a bottle of expensive French vintage, chilled and dripping with condensation. He was holding it by the neck like a club. He wasn't bringing soup. He wasn't bringing comfort. He was bringing booze to celebrate evicting me from my own life. The sight of that green glass bottle told me everything I needed to know. There was no love here. There was only a transaction. And they were here to close the deal. "Hey there, Desmond," Brad boomed, grinning from ear to ear. He placed the champagne on the coffee table right next to my wife's favorite coaster. "We got here as fast as we could. We didn't want you to worry for another second." Keisha rushed over and knelt beside my chair. She took my hand. Her palms were sweating. "Oh, Daddy," she said, scanning my face. "You look so tired. But you made the right choice. The brave choice." I looked at her. I looked deep into her eyes, searching for a trace of the daughter I raised. But all I saw was the reflection of dollar signs. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking past me at the furniture she was planning to sell. "I am tired, Keisha," I whispered, letting my head hang low. "I am just so tired of fighting. The stove, the bills. It is too much. I just want to rest." "Exactly," Brad said, rubbing his hands together. "And that is why we are here, to take the load off. Golden Horizon is ready for you. They have a bed made up with fresh linens. We can drive you over there right now." "Right now?" I asked, feigning alarm. "But it is late. The sooner the better," Desmond Brad insisted. "Start your new life tonight. Why wait? Plus the intake paperwork needs to be faxed before midnight to lock in the rate. Remember the rate." He pulled the thick folder from his jacket pocket. It was the same folder from the night before, but now it seemed to pulse with malice. He slapped it down on the table next to the champagne. "We just need a few signatures," Brad said, uncapping a pen. "Just the standard stuff. Admission agreement, liability waiver, and the updated power of attorney so we can handle the bank for you while you settle in." I looked at the papers. They were the documents Rosenberg had prepared. He had printed them on official-looking legal bond paper. They had watermarks. They had dense paragraphs of legalese. To a greedy real estate agent and a desperate daughter, they looked like the keys to the kingdom. But I knew the truth. The power of attorney referenced a state statute that had been repealed 5 years ago. The admission agreement had a clause in the fine print that voided the contract if the signee was under duress, effectively giving me a legal escape hatch later. And most importantly, they were signing for control of assets that were locked in an irrevocable trust they didn't know existed. They were about to sign a contract with a ghost. I reached for the pen. My hand shook violently. It wasn't hard to fake. The rage inside me was vibrating through my bones. "Where do I sign?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Here," Brad said, pointing to a line with a thick X. "And here, and initial here." He was practically drooling. I could hear his breathing quicken. He was mentally spending the commission from selling my house. He was buying a new car. He was paying off his bookie. I put the pen to the paper. The ink flowed black and permanent. Desmond Otis Cole. I signed the first page. Desmond Otis Cole. I signed the second page. Keisha watched every stroke of the pen like a hawk watching a mouse. She wasn't crying now. She was holding her breath. And then I came to the last page. The power of attorney. The document that would supposedly give them the right to strip me bare. I hesitated. I lifted the pen. "Is this really necessary?" I asked, looking up at them with wet eyes. "Do you really need to control everything? Can't I keep my checkbook?" Brad's face hardened instantly. The mask of kindness slipped. "Desmond, we talked about this," he said, his voice sharp. "You are not capable. You are vulnerable. If you don't sign this, the nursing home won't take you. Do you want to stay here alone and burn the house down?" I looked at Keisha. She nodded. "It is for your protection, Daddy. Just sign it. For my protection." The lie hung in the air, heavy and toxic. I lowered the pen. I signed the paper. I added a little flourish at the end, a final loop that I usually only used for special occasions. It was my signature of execution. But they didn't know whose execution it was. "Done," I whispered, dropping the pen. The moment the pen hit the table, the energy in the room shifted. It was electric. Brad snatched the papers up. He didn't check on me. He didn't offer me a glass of water. He flipped through the pages, checking for signatures. "Perfect," he said. "Absolute perfection." He looked at Keisha and winked. Then he did something that took every ounce of my restraint not to break his jaw. He reached for the champagne bottle. He popped the cork. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet living room. Foam spilled over the neck onto my hardwood floor. He didn't care. It wasn't his floor anymore, or so he thought. He didn't pour me a glass. He took a swig straight from the bottle, then handed it to Keisha. She took a sip, giggling nervously. "To new beginnings," Brad announced, raising the bottle to the ceiling. Then he looked down at me. I was still slumped in the chair, clutching my small bag. He walked over and clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. It was patronizing. It was the way a man pats a dog he is about to put down. "Smart decision, old man," he said, grinning. "You made the right call. We will take it from here. You won't have to worry your pretty little head about numbers ever again." Smart decision, old man. I etched those words into my memory. I carved them into the stone of my resolve. I would remind him of those words when he was standing in the ruins of his life. I stood up. I moved slowly, leaning on the armrest. "Can we go now?" I asked. "I just want to lie down." "Yeah, sure," Brad said, wiping his mouth. "Let's get this show on the road." He grabbed my bag. He didn't offer me his arm. He walked out the door, first eager to get me out so he could come back and start measuring the drapes. Keisha lingered for a second. She looked at the room. She looked at the photos on the wall. For a brief second, I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But then she looked at the champagne bottle in her hand, and the guilt vanished. "Come on, Daddy," she said. "The car is running." I walked to the door. I paused at the threshold. I looked back at my house, my sanctuary. I wasn't saying goodbye. I was saying, "See you soon." I stepped out into the night air. The door clicked shut behind me. I walked toward their car, leaving my home in the hands of enemies. But they didn't know that the house was rigged. The bank accounts were booby-trapped. And the old man shuffling down the path wasn't a victim. I was the Trojan horse, and I had just entered their city. The ride to the facility was silent, not the peaceful silence of a library, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a funeral procession. I sat in the back seat of Brad's Audi, watching the city lights blur past the window. Brad was driving too fast, weaving in and out of traffic with the aggressive entitlement of a man who thought he owned the road. Keisha sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone. The blue light from the screen illuminated her face, making her look pale and ghostly. She didn't turn around to look at me. Not once. We left the well-lit suburbs and entered the industrial district. The scenery changed from manicured lawns to chain-link fences and concrete warehouses. This was the part of town where they put the things nobody wanted to see. Sanitation depots, impound lots, and apparently the elderly. Brad slowed down and turned into a cracked asphalt driveway. The sign out front was supposed to say Golden Horizon Senior Living, but the bulb behind the word Golden had burned out, so it just read Horizon. It flickered ominously in the dark. We parked. I stepped out of the car and the smell hit me instantly. It was a mixture of industrial exhaust, damp cardboard, and something else. Something biological and stale. "This is it," Brad announced, slamming his car door. "Looks peaceful, doesn't it?" I looked at the building. It was a flat, sprawling, single-story structure built in the 70s. As an engineer, I could see the neglect from 50 feet away. The gutters were sagging, filled with years of rotting leaves. The roof shingles were curling up like dead leaves. There were water stains running down the stucco walls. This wasn't a home. It was a holding cell. We walked through the sliding glass doors. The air inside was warm and humid. It smelled of boiled cabbage and strong chemical disinfectant used to cover up the scent of urine. It is a smell you never forget, the smell of institutional despair. The lobby was empty except for a reception desk behind a plexiglass barrier. The carpet was worn thin, revealing the concrete subfloor in patches. A television mounted in the corner was blaring a game show to an empty room. A woman in scrubs sat behind the desk, chewing gum with an open mouth. She didn't look up when we approached. She was scrolling through a magazine. "We are here for the admission," Brad said, tapping on the glass. "Desmond Cole." The woman sighed, popping her gum. She typed something into a computer that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Cole. Right. Bed 4B. Down the hall to the left. Just sign the logbook." She didn't ask for medical records. She didn't ask about my diet. She didn't even look at me. To her, I was just another number to fill a bed, another check from the state. Keisha grabbed my small overnight bag. "Come on, Daddy," she said, her voice tight. "Let's get you settled." We walked down the hallway. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a headache-inducing buzz. We passed rooms with open doors. I saw elderly men and women lying in beds, staring at the ceiling. Some were moaning softly. Others were sleeping with their mouths open. There were no nurses in sight, no activities, just rows of human beings waiting for the end. This is what my daughter thought I deserved. We reached room 4B. It was a small, cramped room with 2 beds separated by a thin curtain. The bed by the window was occupied by a man who was coughing a wet, rattling cough. The bed by the door was empty. It had a thin mattress and a single flat pillow. "Here we go," Brad said, tossing my bag onto the bed. "Cozy. You will make friends in no time." I stood in the center of the room, clutching my hat. I looked at the peeling paint on the walls. I looked at the linoleum floor that was scuffed and stained. Keisha refused to make eye contact with me. She was looking at her watch. "We have to go, Daddy," she said quickly. "Brad has an early meeting tomorrow, and we need to get the paperwork faxed." She stepped forward and gave me a stiff, awkward hug. It lasted less than a second. "We will come back this weekend," she promised. "We will bring you some books, maybe some snacks. You just rest now." Brad didn't hug me. He just nodded. "Be good, Desmond," he said. "Don't cause trouble. The staff here don't look like they have much patience." And then they turned around. They didn't look back. They walked out of the room, down the hallway, and out of my life. I listened to their footsteps fade away. I heard the electronic swoosh of the front doors opening and closing. I heard the engine of the Audi roar to life and peel out of the parking lot. They were gone. I stood there for a full minute listening to the man in the other bed cough. He rolled over and looked at me with cloudy eyes. "New guy," he wheezed. "Good luck. The food tastes like wet cardboard." I looked at him. I smiled. A genuine smile. "I won't be staying for dinner," I said. I picked up my bag. I didn't unpack. I didn't sit on the bed. I walked out of the room. I didn't go back toward the lobby where the gum-chewing receptionist was sitting. I knew the layout of these buildings. They were all built on the same cheap template. Fire code required an emergency exit at the rear of the east wing. I walked down the corridor past the laundry room where loud machines were clanking. I walked with the stride of a man who had a purpose. I wasn't Desmond, the dementia patient, anymore. I was Desmond, the architect of his own destiny. I reached the rear exit. The red sign glowed above the door. "Emergency exit only. Alarm will sound." I looked at the door mechanism. It was a magnetic lock, but the green light was on. The lock was disengaged, another code violation. In a fire, this door might have jammed, but tonight it was my gateway to freedom. I pushed the bar. The door opened silently. No alarm, no siren, just the cool rush of the night air. I stepped out into the rear parking lot. It was dark and quiet. The air smelled of rain and asphalt much better than the bleach inside. Parked in the shadows away from the streetlights was a car. It wasn't a taxi. It was a black Lincoln Navigator. Huge, polished, powerful. The engine was idling, producing a low rumble that vibrated in my chest. As I approached, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was 6'4" with shoulders wide enough to block out the moon. He was wearing a tailored suit that fit him perfectly. His name was Jamal. 30 years ago, Jamal was a skinny kid from the projects who stole copper wire from one of my construction sites. I didn't call the police. I handed him a broom and told him if he wanted metal, he could earn it. He swept floors for 6 months. Then he carried bricks. Then he learned to frame. Then he went to night school for engineering, which I paid for. Now Jamal owned the largest minority-led construction firm in the Southeast. He was the son I never had. He walked around the car and took the small bag from my hand. He didn't say a word at first. He just looked at me. He looked at the dilapidated building behind me, and then he looked at my face. His eyes were filled with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice deep and respectful. "I can't believe they actually did it. I can't believe they left you here." "They didn't leave me, Jamal," I said, adjusting my jacket. "They just dropped me off at the starting line." Jamal opened the rear door for me. He hesitated, his hand on the door frame. "Mr. Cole, are you sure about this?" he asked. He looked toward the city, toward the direction of my house. That house. That. I remember when we laid the foundation for the extension. I remember you sanding those floors by hand for weeks. That is your blood and sweat in that wood. Are you sure you want to let them take it, even for a little while? I looked at Jamal. I saw the loyalty in his eyes. He loved that house almost as much as I did. because he helped build it. He understood the value of labor. I placed a hand on his shoulder. I felt the muscle of the man I had helped shape. "Jamal," I said softly, looking him in the eye, "you are a builder, so listen to me. A house is just brick and mortar. It is wood and glass. It can be bought. It can be sold. It can be destroyed." I paused, looking back at the pathetic, flickering sign of the nursing home. "But dignity," I continued, my voice hardening. "Dignity is the rebar. It is the steel spine that holds everything up. If you lose your house, you can build another one. But if you lose your dignity, you collapse. Tonight, I traded the brick and mortar to keep the rebar." Jamal nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson as he always did. "I understand, Mr. Cole," he said. "Then let's go," I said, climbing into the plush leather seat of the Lincoln. "I have a war to win." Jamal closed the door. The sound was solid and heavy. A vault closing. He got into the driver's seat. "Where to, Mr. Cole?" he asked, looking in the rearview mirror. "Take me to the safe house," I said. "And Jamal, stop by a drive-thru. I am starving. That steak they served me was tough enough to pave a road with." Jamal laughed, a rich, warm sound that filled the car. "Yes, sir." The Lincoln pulled away, gliding smoothly into the night, leaving the golden horizon and my ungrateful family in the dust. I leaned back and closed my eyes. The first phase was complete. I was officially a ghost. Now it was time to start haunting them. I sat in the passenger seat of Jamal's Lincoln, the glow of my tablet illuminating the dark interior of the car. We were parked a few blocks away, close enough to be relevant, but far enough to be invisible. On the screen, the feed from my living room cameras played out like a horror movie. But the monsters weren't hiding under the bed. They were drinking my scotch and standing on my Persian rug. It had been less than 2 hours since they dropped me off at the nursing home. Less than 2 hours since they left me in a room that smelled of despair. And yet my house was already full of people. They didn't waste a second. Brad had invited his business partners. I recognized a few of them. Men in cheap suits with loud laughs, the kind of guys who talked about hustle culture while living on credit. They were swarming my living room, treating my sanctuary like a frat house. I adjusted the volume on the tablet. Brad's voice boomed through the tiny speakers. He was standing by the mantel holding a glass of my 30-year-old single malt. He didn't even add ice. He was chugging it like it was cheap beer. "To the deal of the century," Brad shouted, raising the glass. The room erupted in cheers. Keisha was there too. She wasn't grieving. She wasn't worried about her father sleeping in a strange bed. She was showing a woman in a red dress around the kitchen, pointing at my cabinets with a look of disgust. I zoomed in on Brad. He was holding court, basking in the admiration of his sycophants. "You guys won't believe how easy it was," Brad bragged, slurring his words slightly. "The old man is completely gone. Lights are on, but nobody is home. I told him to sign, and he just scribbled away. Handed us the keys, the deed, the whole kingdom." One of his friends, a guy named Mike, who I knew had been sued for fraud twice, laughed. "But isn't he, still alive?" Mike asked. "Won't he want to come back?" Brad waved his hand dismissively. "He's in Shady Oaks now, man. Once you go in there, you don't come out. We got the power of attorney locked down. He's legally incompetent. This place is ours. And man, did we get it for a steal. 0 down payment, just pure equity." I watched as he leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially, though the high-definition audio picked up every word. "We already took out a line of credit against the property this morning. 200 grand. That is seed money for the AI project, boys. We are going to the moon." I felt Jamal stiffen beside me. I glanced at him. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Do you want me to go down there, Mr. Cole?" Jamal asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I can clear that house in 5 minutes." I shook my head. "No. Let them have their night. Let them think they are kings. It makes the fall so much harder." I turned my attention back to the screen. The party was shifting gears. It wasn't just a celebration anymore. It was an invasion. Keisha walked into the living room. She was holding a sledgehammer. I blinked. I thought I was seeing things, but no. She was dragging a heavy sledgehammer across my hardwood floors, leaving a deep scratch in the varnish I had applied myself. "Okay, everyone, listen up," Keisha yelled, clapping her hands. "Brad promised me an open-concept living room, and I want this gloomy old wall gone. Who wants to do the honors?" My heart stopped. She was pointing at the fireplace wall. That wasn't just a wall. That was the heart of the house. Beatrice and I had built that fireplace together. I laid the bricks. She mixed the mortar. We embedded a small time capsule behind the third brick on the left, a photo of us, and a letter to our unborn children. It was sacred ground. Brad grabbed the sledgehammer. He looked like a child with a new toy. I always hated this thing, he spat. It smells like old smoke and sadness. Let's open this place up. Modernize it. Flip it. He swung. The sound of metal hitting brick was distorted by the microphone, but I felt the impact in my own chest. Dust flew into the air. A chunk of red brick I had selected by hand from a salvage yard in 1980 crumbled onto the floor. The crowd cheered. "Break it down," someone chanted. Brad swung again, and again. Each blow was an act of violence. He wasn't just remodeling, he was erasing. He was erasing me. He was erasing Beatrice. He was destroying the evidence that we had ever existed, that we had ever loved, that we had ever built a life in that space. Keisha stood by filming it on her phone. She was laughing. She was posting it to social media. Demo day, I could imagine the caption. Out with the old, in with the new. I watched as the wall began to give way. The dust settled on my books. It settled on my armchair. It coated the memories of 40 years in a layer of gray debris. Jamal turned his head away. He couldn't watch. "Mr. Cole, turn it off," he whispered. "You don't need to see this." I kept my eyes glued to the screen. "Yes, I do," I said softly. "I need to see it. I need to remember exactly how this feels." I watched until Brad was panting, covered in sweat and brick dust. He handed the hammer to Mike, who took a swing. Then Keisha took a turn. They were taking turns murdering my home. When the hole in the wall was big enough to see through to the kitchen, Brad climbed onto the rubble. He raised his arms like a conqueror standing on the ruins of a defeated city. To the future, he screamed. I reached out and tapped the screen, freezing the image. Brad, standing on the broken bricks. Keisha, laughing with a glass of champagne. I took a deep breath. The anger was gone. In its place was something colder, something absolute. They had destroyed the past. Fine. But they had forgotten that I controlled the future. "Drive Jamal," I said. "Where to, Mr. Cole?" "To the hotel. I need a good night's sleep, because tomorrow morning when Brad tries to swipe that card to pay for his contractors, he is going to find out that the bank is closed. And when the inspector sees this video of him destroying a load-bearing wall in a historic preservation trust property," I paused, looking at the frozen image of Brad one last time. "He is going to wish he had stayed in the nursing home with me." Jamal started the car. The engine purred. We pulled away from the curb, leaving the party in full swing. They were dancing on a grave. They just didn't realize it was their own. As we drove through the city, I thought about the time capsule behind the brick. They would probably find it. They would probably throw it in the trash without even opening it. That was okay. Beatrice wasn't in the wall. She was in the passenger seat of my heart. And she was telling me to finish this. I took out my phone and composed a text to Rosenberg. They started demolition. Load-bearing wall. Fireplace. Send the inspector at 8 a.m. sharp. I hit send. The party was over. The hangover was about to begin, and it was going to last a lifetime. The sun rose over Atlanta with a brilliance that hurt the eyes. In my hotel room, I was already awake. I had been awake since 4 a.m., fueled by adrenaline and the kind of focus I used to have when pouring the foundation for a skyscraper. On the desk in front of me sat a pot of black coffee and my tablet. I was not watching the news. I was watching the financial ruin of my enemies unfold in real time. It started at 8:15 in the morning. Brad was standing at the counter of Stone and Timber, a high-end supply yard on the west side. I knew this place. I had bought lumber there for 30 years. I knew the owner. I knew they did not tolerate non-payment. Brad looked terrible. He was wearing sunglasses indoors to hide the bags under his eyes from the champagne binge the night before. But his arrogance was still intact. He was leaning on the counter, tapping his fingers impatiently. "I need the Italian marble delivered by Tuesday," he told the clerk, loud enough for everyone in the store to hear. "And I want the premium grade. None of that seconds trash. We are doing a full remodel on a historic property. Money is no object. Money is no object." The favorite phrase of a man who has never earned his own fortune. The clerk, a man named Earl, who I had known since he was a teenager, looked unimpressed. He typed the order into the system. "That will be $14,000, Mr. Miller," Earl said flatly, "plus a delivery fee." Brad scoffed as if the amount was pocket change. He pulled out a sleek black credit card. It was the card connected to the home equity line of credit he had opened yesterday. The loan secured by my house. The $200,000 he thought he had stolen from me. Put it on this, Brad said, flipping the card onto the counter with a wrist flick he probably practiced in the mirror. Earl picked up the card. He inserted it into the chip reader. I leaned closer to my tablet screen. This was the moment. The stress test. Brad drummed on the counter, humming a tune. He was already mentally installing that marble in a kitchen that was currently full of rubble. The machine beeped, a harsh, dissonant tone. Earl looked at the screen. Then he looked at Brad. It was declined, Mr. Miller. Brad froze. He laughed a nervous, short bark of a laugh. Don't be ridiculous. That is a brand new line of credit. Run it again. It is probably your old machine. Earl sighed. He ran it again. Beep. Declined. Do not honor, Earl read from the screen. Brad snatched the card back. His face was turning a blotchy red. This is a mistake. I just authorized this yesterday. Do you know who I am? I am dealing with millions in assets here. Earl crossed his arms. I don't care if you are dealing with the Pope, son. The machine says no. Do you have another form of payment? Brad patted his pockets. He didn't have $14,000. He probably didn't have $14. He lived his entire life on leverage and lies. Hold on, Brad stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. I need to call the bank. It is just a security freeze. You know how it is with large transactions. He stepped away from the counter, pulling out his phone. I switched my audio feed to listen to his call. He dialed the bank's priority line. He was pacing back and forth in the aisle between the bags of cement and the PVC pipes. Yes, this is Brad Miller, he hissed into the phone. I am at a vendor trying to make a purchase and my card is being declined. Fix it, now. I listened to the silence on the line as the operator checked the account. I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted better than any vintage wine. Mr. Miller. The operator's voice came through tinny but clear. I see the account here. The line of credit has been revoked. Revoked, Brad shouted, causing two other customers to turn and stare. What do you mean, revoked? I signed the papers yesterday. The house is the collateral. Yes, sir, the operator replied, calm and professional. However, our risk management department received a notification this morning. There is a cloud on the title of the property. The collateral you offered is currently under a legal dispute regarding ownership status. Legal dispute, Brad yelled. There is no dispute. My father-in-law signed it over. I have the power of attorney. I am looking at the file, sir, the operator continued. The power of attorney you submitted is being contested. Furthermore, the property in question is flagged as belonging to the Cole Family Irrevocable Trust, not Desmond Cole, personally. Therefore, Mr. Cole did not have the authority to leverage it, and by extension, neither do you. The funds have been frozen pending a fraud investigation. Fraud investigation. Those two words hit Brad like a sledgehammer. He staggered back, bumping into a display of paint cans. Fraud, he whispered, his voice trembling. No. You don't understand. The old man, he signed... We can discuss this further at a branch, sir, the operator said, but for now the account is closed. Have a nice day. Click. Brad stood there in the middle of the hardware store holding a dead phone. He looked at Earl. Earl shook his head and started helping the next customer. Brad walked out of the store empty-handed. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and hadn't hit the bottom yet. He got into his car and slammed the door. He didn't start the engine. He dialed Keisha. Pick up, pick up, pick up, he screamed at the phone, hitting the steering wheel. Scene switch. Keisha was at my house. She was sitting at my dining room table, surrounded by the dust and debris from the wall they had destroyed the night before. She was looking at tile samples. Her phone rang. She answered it cheerfully. Hey, babe, did you get the marble? She asked. Shut up, Keisha, Brad screamed through the phone. Shut up and listen. The money is gone. What? Keisha dropped the tile sample. It cracked on the floor. The bank, Brad, was hyperventilating. They froze the line of credit. They said the house belongs to a trust. They said the power of attorney is useless. They are talking about fraud, Keisha. Fraud. Keisha stood up, pushing her chair back. That is impossible. Daddy doesn't have a trust. He never told us about a trust. He barely knows how to use online banking. Well, apparently he knows enough to lock us out, Brad yelled. Check the other accounts. The retirement fund, the savings, the ones you have access to with the login he gave you. We need cash now. I have a demolition crew demanding payment in an hour." "Hang on," Keisha said, her hands shaking. I watched on the living room camera as she opened her laptop. She typed in the password for my main checking account, the one I had let her see for years, the one that used to have my life savings in it. She hit enter. The screen loaded. I knew exactly what she was seeing. I had moved the money 3 days ago. I didn't move it to another bank. I moved it into a diversified portfolio under the trust umbrella managed by Rosenberg's firm. Keisha stared at the screen. Her mouth fell open. She hit refresh. She hit it again and again, as if clicking the mouse harder would make the numbers change. 0.00. "Brad," she whispered. "It is empty." "What do you mean, empty?" Brad shouted. "There was $600,000 in there last week." "It is gone," Keisha cried. "There is a transfer dated 2 days ago, before the dinner, before he signed the papers." Brad went silent on the other end of the line, the silence of realization. "He played us," Brad whispered. "The old man played us." He knew, Keisha said, looking around the room as if the walls were listening. He knew we were coming. The dinner, the headache, the act. It was all a lie. "He isn't in Shady Oaks, is he?" Brad asked, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. Keisha ran to the window, looking out at the driveway as if expecting me to be standing there. "I don't know," she sobbed. "But Brad, the demolition crew, the guys we hired to break down the wall, they are asking for their check." "Pay them from our savings," Brad snapped. "We can't," Keisha screamed. "We used our savings for the deposit on the contractors. We are overdrawn, Brad. If we don't pay them, they will put a lien on our house. Not Daddy's house, our house." I sat in my hotel room and poured another cup of coffee. This was the beauty of the trap. It wasn't just about stopping them from taking my money. It was about letting them commit to expenses they couldn't afford based on money they didn't have. They had dug a hole expecting to fill it with my dirt. Now they were just standing in a hole, and it was about to get deeper. I picked up my phone. I sent a text to Jamal. "Phase 1 complete. They are broke. Initiate Phase 2. Send the inspector." I looked back at the screen. Keisha was weeping at the table, her face buried in her hands. Brad was speeding down the highway, probably trying to come up with a lie to tell his creditors. They were panicked. They were confused. But they still didn't understand the full scope of what was happening. They thought this was just a financial hiccup. They didn't realize that they had committed a crime by destroying that wall. I zoomed in on the broken bricks of the fireplace. "You wanted an open concept, Keisha," I said to the screen. "Well, you are about to be very open. Open to lawsuits, open to criminal charges, and open to the elements when the bank takes your roof." I closed the laptop. I needed a shower. I had a busy day ahead. I had to go visit a friend at the city planning office. And then I had a lunch date with Justice. The accounts were frozen. But my revenge was just heating up. The headache that Brad woke up with was about to get a whole lot worse. I watched him on the living room feed, pacing back and forth amidst the rubble of my fireplace. He was holding an ice pack to his forehead and yelling into his phone, trying to convince a demolition contractor to keep working on credit. The contractor must have said no because Brad threw his phone onto the sofa and kicked a pile of red bricks. The dust from the destruction still hung in the air, catching the morning light. It looked like a war zone. My beautiful mahogany floors were scratched and covered in grit. The hole in the wall was a jagged, gaping wound. Brad looked at it not with regret but with frustration. He was angry that destroying my life was proving to be so inconvenient. Then the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, authoritative ring. Not the ring of a friend, the ring of a problem. Brad smoothed his hair and walked to the door. He probably hoped it was the marble delivery guy finally accepting his credit card. He swung the door open with his usual arrogance, ready to bully whoever was on the other side. But it was not a delivery driver. Standing on my porch was a man in a crisp white shirt with a city badge clipped to his pocket and a clipboard in his hand. Behind him, parked at the curb, was a white sedan with the City of Atlanta seal on the door. It was Inspector Henderson. I knew him. He was a man who took building codes as seriously as I took bridge foundations. He was devoid of humor and immune to charm. "Can I help you?" Brad asked, his tone impatient. Inspector Henderson did not smile. He looked past Brad into the hallway. He saw the dust. He saw the debris. He sniffed the air like a bloodhound smelling smoke. I am here to investigate a report of unpermitted structural alterations, Henderson said, his voice dry as dust. Brad laughed, a nervous, dismissive laugh. Unpermitted. Look, pal, we are just doing a little cosmetic work. Opening up the floor plan. I am the owner. I can do what I want. Henderson stepped inside without asking for permission. The law gave him the right to enter when a violation was visible from the street. He walked past Brad, his heavy work boots crunching on the grit. He walked straight to the living room and stopped in front of the demolished fireplace. He looked at the jagged hole where the load-bearing wall used to be. He looked at the pile of antique red clay bricks. He pulled a pen from his pocket and tapped the clipboard. Cosmetic work, Henderson repeated. You removed a structural masonry wall. Do you have a permit for this? Brad crossed his arms, puffing out his chest. Look, I am in the process of filing the paperwork. My architect is handling it. It is just a wall. What is the big deal? Henderson turned slowly to face him. The big deal, Mr. Miller, is that you are standing in a protected structure. Brad blinked. Protected? What are you talking about? It is just an old house. No, Henderson said, flipping a page on his clipboard. It is not just an old house. This property at 420 Oak Street is listed on the Atlanta Registry of Historic Places. It was registered 5 years ago under the Preservation of African American Heritage Act. I sat in my hotel room and took a sip of coffee. This was the payoff, the secret I had kept for 5 years. When Beatrice passed away, I wanted to ensure that no developer could ever tear down the home we built. I wanted to make sure that our history was set in stone. So I applied for historical status. It meant that I couldn't change the exterior or major structural elements without a hearing before a city board. It meant the house was a monument. Brad did not know this. He thought real estate was just square footage and profit margins. He didn't understand legacy. Historic, Brad sputtered. That is ridiculous. My father-in-law never mentioned that. Ignorance of the status is not a defense, Henderson said coldly. The status is a matter of public record. As the acting agent for the property, you should have done your due diligence. Henderson walked over to the pile of bricks. He picked one up. These are original 1970s Savannah clay bricks, he said, shaking his head. You can't even buy these anymore. This is a willful destruction of historical fabric. So, what? Brad snapped. I will pay a fine. Just write me a ticket so I can get back to work. I have a schedule to keep. He reached for his wallet, the empty wallet connected to the frozen accounts. He thought he could buy his way out of this like he bought his way out of everything else. Henderson dropped the brick back onto the pile. The thud echoed in the silent house. This is not a parking ticket, Mr. Miller. This is a Tier 1 violation. He pulled a bright orange sticker from his clipboard. It was the size of a dinner plate. He peeled the backing off and slapped it onto the front window. Stop work order. Then he turned back to Brad. Effective immediately, this site is shut down. No workers, no tools, no construction. You have 48 hours to hire a certified structural engineer specializing in historic preservation to assess the damage. Brad turned pale. But, and Henderson continued, his voice raising slightly, you are being cited for conducting demolition without a permit on a historic landmark. The base fine for this violation is $50,000. The number hung in the air. 50,000. Brad's knees actually buckled. He grabbed the back of the sofa to steady himself. 50,000, he whispered. Plus remediation costs, Henderson added. You will be required to restore the wall to its original condition using period-appropriate materials. If you cannot find matching bricks, you will have to have them custom manufactured. Restore it, Brad squeaked. But I wanted an open concept. The city does not care what you wanted, Henderson said, snapping his clipboard shut. You destroyed a piece of history. Now you are going to pay for it. The citation will be mailed to the owner of record. Henderson walked to the door. He paused and looked back at Brad, who was standing amidst the ruin of his own making. And Mr. Miller, Henderson said, if I see one more hammer swing in this house before that fine is paid, I will have you arrested for criminal negligence. Have a nice day. The door closed. Brad stood there paralyzed. He looked at the orange sticker on the window blocking the sunlight. He looked at the pile of bricks that was now a $50,000 pile of debt. He pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it twice before he could dial. Keisha, pick up, he screamed at the voicemail. You need to come home. Now. The city. The inspector. They say the house is a museum or something. They fined us 50 grand, Keisha. 50 grand. We have to put the wall back. We have to put it back. He sank down onto the floor, sitting in the dust. He put his head in his hands and let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. I watched him from my hotel room. I felt a deep, cold satisfaction. It wasn't happiness. Happiness is warm. This was the cold, hard feeling of justice. I remembered the day I registered the house. Beatrice had been gone for 6 months. I walked into the city office and signed the papers. The clerk had asked me, "Mr. Cole, why do you want to restrict what you can do with your own property?" And I told her, because some things are too important to change just because it is fashionable. Brad wanted to be modern. He wanted to erase the past. Now, the past was coming back to bury him. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number for the Historic Preservation Society. I had a feeling they would be very interested to see the video footage of the demolition. It might even warrant a criminal inquiry. But first I needed to make another move. Brad was down, but he wasn't out. He was desperate. And desperate men do dangerous things. He would try to find money. He would try to sell the furniture. He would try to pawn my tools. I couldn't let that happen. I stood up and put on my jacket. It was time for the next phase. It was time to introduce the real owner of the house. Because technically Desmond Cole didn't own the house either. And the trust had very strict rules about tenants who destroyed property. I looked at Brad one last time on the screen. He was weeping into his hands, wiping snot onto his expensive sleeve. "Cry all you want, son," I said to the empty room. "But tears don't mix mortar." I closed the laptop. The lesson was just beginning. Gravity was kicking in, and Brad was about to learn just how fast a man can fall when the floor is removed from under him. The doorbell rang at the house on Oak Street for the second time that morning. Brad flinched. He was still sitting on the floor amidst the ruin of my fireplace, staring at the orange stop work order on the window. He looked like a man who had been punched in the gut. I was not there to see it personally, but I knew exactly what was happening. I had orchestrated every second of their misery. I imagined Brad crawling to the door, hoping it was the marble delivery guy coming back to say it was all a mistake. He pulled the door open. It was not the marble guy. It was a process server. A large man with a thick neck and zero patience. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how the renovation was going. He just shoved a thick envelope into Brad's chest. "You have been served," the man grunted. Brad scrambled to catch the packet before it hit the dusty floor. Served. Served for what? He tore open the envelope. His eyes scanned the legal jargon. It wasn't a parking ticket. It wasn't a zoning fine. It was a summons to appear in Superior Court. The plaintiff was the Cole Family Irrevocable Trust. The charge was misappropriation of assets, destruction of property, and fraud. Keisha snatched the papers from his trembling hands. "This makes no sense," she screamed, her voice cracking. "Daddy doesn't have a trust. Daddy is in a nursing home eating Jell-O." "Who is doing this?" Brad grabbed his hair, pulling at the roots. "It is that lawyer," he yelled. "That old shark Rosenberg. He must have set this up before the old man went senile. We have to go there. Now." "But we can't leave," Keisha cried, pointing at the hole in the wall. "The inspector said—" "Screw the inspector," Brad roared. "We have the power of attorney, Keisha. We are the legal guardians. We own Desmond. That means we own his lawyer, too. We are going down there, and we are going to fire Rosenberg and make him drop this lawsuit. Get in the car." I watched them on the security feed as they ran out of the house, leaving the front door unlocked. They didn't care about security anymore. They were in survival mode. I closed my laptop in the hotel room. I stood up and walked to the mirror. I looked at the man reflected there. Yesterday, I had been a frail, hunched-over old man shaking in a chair. Today, that man was gone. I put on my best suit. It was a 3-piece charcoal wool suit tailored in London 20 years ago. It fit me like armor. I tied my silk tie into a perfect Windsor knot. I put on my gold cufflinks, the ones Beatrice gave me when I retired. I brushed my gray hair back, revealing the strong forehead that had weathered 72 years of life. I did not take my cane. I did not need it. The only thing I needed to lean on today was the truth. I grabbed my briefcase and walked out of the hotel. Jamal was waiting downstairs with the Lincoln. He opened the door with a grin. "Ready for the main event, Mr. Cole?" he asked. I adjusted my cuffs. "I was born ready, Jamal. Drive." We arrived at Rosenberg's office 10 minutes before them. I entered through this private back entrance. Rosenberg met me in the hallway. He was smoking a cigar, violating every building code in the city and loving every minute of it. "They are in the elevator," he said, checking his watch. "They are screaming at my receptionist. They sound charming." "Let them scream," I said. "Screamers are just people who have run out of intelligent things to say." I went into the main conference room. It was a massive room with a table long enough to land a plane on. At the head of the table was a large, high-backed leather chair. My chair. I stepped into the adjoining viewing room behind a one-way mirror. I wanted to watch them squirm before I dropped the hammer. The door to the conference room burst open. Brad stormed in, followed by Keisha. They looked like refugees from a disaster. Brad's expensive shirt was stained with brick dust. Keisha's mascara was running down her face. They smelled of sweat and panic. Rosenberg walked in behind them, calm as a cucumber. He sat down at the far end of the table, opening a file. "Mr. Miller, Mrs. King." "Miller Rosenberg," said his voice smooth. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Brad slammed the court summons onto the polished mahogany table. "Fix this," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Rosenberg. "You work for Desmond Cole, right? Well, we are Desmond Cole now. We hold his power of attorney. We are his voice. And we are telling you to drop this lawsuit immediately." Rosenberg didn't blink. He picked up a piece of lint from his sleeve. "I am afraid you are mistaken, Mr. Miller. I do not work for Desmond Cole, the individual. I represent the Cole Family Trust, and the trust is a separate legal entity. You have no authority over it." Keisha stepped forward, slamming her hands on the table. "This is entrapment. You knew about this. You let us think we could sell the house." "I let you think nothing," Rosenberg replied coldly. "You assumed, and you know what they say about assumptions." "Listen to me, you old bat," Brad growled, leaning over the table. "We have no money. The bank froze everything. We have a $50,000 fine from the city. We need access to the trust funds, now, or I swear to God I will sue you for malpractice." Rosenberg smiled. It was a shark smile. "You want to sue me? Please do. I could use the entertainment. But before you do that, there is someone who would like to have a word with you about the structural integrity of a certain fireplace." Brad froze. "Who?" "The inspector." "I already talked to that guy." "No," Rosenberg said, standing up. "Not the inspector. The landlord." Rosenberg looked toward the side door. "The door where I was waiting." He nodded. I took a deep breath. I channeled every ounce of strength, every ounce of dignity, and every ounce of fatherly disappointment into my posture. I opened the door. I stepped into the room. The silence was absolute. It sucked the air out of the room. Brad's jaw literally dropped. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. Keisha let out a strangled gasp and grabbed the back of a chair for support. They were expecting a confused invalid in a hospital gown. They were expecting a man who needed help using a spoon. Instead, they got me. I walked to the head of the table. My footsteps were heavy and rhythmic on the hardwood floor. I stood 6'2", my back straight, my shoulders broad. I looked at them with eyes that were clear, sharp, and utterly unforgiving. I didn't say a word at first. I just looked at them. I looked at the dust on Brad's shirt. I looked at the greed fading from Keisha's eyes, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. Keisha was the first to find her voice. It was a small, broken sound. "Daddy," she stammered. "Daddy, did you escape?" She looked at the door as if expecting nursing home orderlies to burst in with a net. I looked at her. I didn't soften. "Escape?" I asked, my voice deep and resonant, filling the room without shouting. I laughed, a short, dry laugh. "I never checked in, Keisha." Brad stumbled back, hitting the wall. But we dropped you off. We saw you. The room, the bed. You saw what you wanted to see," I said, walking slowly toward them. "You saw an old man you could discard. You saw a problem you could solve with a cheap nursing home and a signature." I stopped 3 feet from Brad. I could smell the fear coming off him. "I walked out the back door before your tail lights even left the parking lot," I said. Brad shook his head, his eyes darting around the room. "But the papers. You signed them. The power of attorney, the admission forms." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my reading glasses. I put them on slowly, deliberately. "Did you read the papers, Brad?" I asked. "Did you read the fine print? Or were you too busy popping champagne?" Brad didn't answer. He couldn't breathe. Those papers were a test, I said, taking off the glasses. And you failed. You signed a liability waiver for a facility I never entered, and you accepted power of attorney for assets I do not personally own. You have power over nothing, Brad. You are the captain of a sinking ship. Keisha began to cry. Not the fake tears from the dinner. Real ugly tears of realization. Daddy, please, she sobbed, reaching out a hand. We were scared. We thought, stop. I said, cutting her off like a knife. Do not insult me with more lies. You weren't scared. You were greedy. You tried to gaslight me, Keisha. You tried to make me believe I was losing my mind. You tried to steal my dignity. I turned my back on her. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, but it was necessary. I walked to the head of the table, to the big leather chair. Brad was standing near it. He looked like a cornered rat. I looked at him. I looked at the chair. And then I looked back at him. Mr. Miller, I said, my voice dropping to a growl. You are sitting in my chair. Brad scrambled away from the chair as if it were made of fire. He tripped over his own feet and nearly fell. I sat down. I placed my hands on the armrests. I felt the cool leather. I felt the power returning to me. I looked down the long table at the two people who had tried to destroy me. Now, I said, linking my fingers together. Let's talk about the rent. Rent, Brad squeaked. What rent? The rent for the house you are currently occupying, I said. Since you are not the owners and you have destroyed property of the trust, your status has been downgraded from guests to squatters. Rosenberg slid a file across the table toward them. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, Rosenberg said cheerfully, or you will be removed by the sheriff. And regarding the $50,000 fine from the city, the trust will not be paying that. That is a personal liability caused by your negligence. 50,000, Brad whispered. I don't have 50,000. I know, I said, leaning forward. And that is why the bank is going to take your car and your condo and anything else you have managed to scrape together in your miserable life. Keisha fell to her knees. Daddy, please, don't do this. We are family. I looked at her. The little girl on the bike was gone. Family, I repeated, tasting the word. Family doesn't try to lock their father in a warehouse, Keisha. Family doesn't turn their mother's picture face down. I stood up. The meeting was over. Get out, I said. They didn't move. I slammed my hand on the table. A sound like a thunderclap. Get out! They ran. They ran out of the conference room. They ran out of the office. They ran like children who had woken up a sleeping giant. I watched the door close behind them. The silence returned to the room. Rosenberg looked at me. He nodded. That was effective, he said. I sat back down in my chair. I felt tired, but it was a good tired. The kind of tired you feel after building something strong. It is not over yet, Saul, I said, looking at the empty chairs. Gravity hasn't finished its work. I turned my chair to face the window, looking out over the city I helped build. They were free for now, but they had nowhere to go, and I had one more lesson to teach them, the lesson of total loss. They were still standing there trembling in front of my desk when Rosenberg decided to drop the nuclear bomb. Brad was sweating through his suit, and Keisha was gripping her purse like a shield. They had just realized they were powerless, but they did not yet understand the magnitude of their crime. They thought this was just a family dispute that could be settled in civil court. They thought they could just walk away and apologize later. But Rosenberg was not done. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a black binder. It was thick, heavy, and bound in leather. He placed it on the table with a thud that sounded like a coffin lid closing. There is one more thing, Rosenberg said, his voice deceptively light. Before you leave, you need to understand why your power of attorney was rejected by the bank this morning, and why you are likely facing a federal investigation. Brad wiped his forehead. Investigation, he stammered. For what? We just tried to take a loan. It was a mistake. It was not a mistake, Rosenberg said, opening the binder. It was a felony. He spun the binder around so they could read the title page. The letters were bold and black. The Cole Family Irrevocable Trust, dated 10 years ago. Brad squinted at the document. A trust. So what? We are the guardians. We control the trust. Rosenberg laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. You really did not do your homework, did you, Mr. Miller? You see, there are two types of trusts, revocable and irrevocable. A revocable trust can be changed or canceled by the owner at any time. If this were a revocable trust, your power of attorney might have given you some leverage. Rosenberg leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Brad. But this is an irrevocable trust. Do you know what that means? Brad shook his head mute. It means, Rosenberg continued, that the moment Desmond signed this document 10 years ago, he gave up ownership of his assets. The house, the land, the savings accounts. They were all transferred into the ownership of the trust entity. Desmond Cole does not own the house at 420 Oak Street. The trust owns it. Desmond is merely the lifetime beneficiary. He has the right to live there. He has the right to use the income. But he does not hold the title. I watched Keisha's face as the realization hit her. That means she whispered, horror dawning in her eyes. That means the power of attorney is worthless, I finished for her. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the skyline. When your mother died, Keisha, I knew I had to protect what we built, not from the market, not from the government, but from uncertainty. I set up this trust to ensure that no matter what happened to me, the legacy would remain intact. I made myself the manager, but I removed my ability to sell the assets personally. I turned back to face them. So when you forged my signature on that power of attorney, you granted yourself authority over my personal assets. But I have no personal assets. I own my clothes, I own my books, and I own my car. That is it. Everything of value belongs to the trust. Rosenberg picked up the narrative smoothly. Which brings us to your current problem, Mr. Miller. Yesterday you went to the bank. You presented yourself as the agent of the owner. You used the house as collateral to secure a line of credit for $200,000. You signed a mortgage deed, pledging the property to the bank. Brad nodded slowly. So we just cancel the loan. We give the money back. Rosenberg shook his head. You cannot just give it back, Brad. You committed bank fraud. You pledged an asset that you do not have the legal authority to pledge. You told the bank that Desmond Cole had the title and that you represented him. That is a lie on a federal loan application. The FBI calls that obtaining money under false pretenses. Brad's legs finally gave out. He slumped into one of the chairs he had been so eager to sit in earlier. Bank fraud, he wheezed. And it gets worse, Rosenberg added mercilessly. Because the trust is an irrevocable trust meant for preservation, any attempt to encumber the assets by a non-trustee is considered an act of theft against the beneficiaries. Keisha looked up. But I am a beneficiary. I am the only heir. Rosenberg flipped to page 50 of the binder. Ah, yes. The beneficiary clause. He pointed to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. I know you hate reading, Keisha, I said, so let me summarize it for you. It is called a no-contest clause. It states that if any beneficiary attempts to attack the trust, challenge the trustee, or take action that damages the assets of the trust, they are automatically disinherited. Keisha screamed. It was a short, sharp sound of pure disbelief. Disinherited, she gasped. Completely, Rosenberg confirmed. As of yesterday, when you destroyed the wall and attempted to fraudulently mortgage the house, you triggered this clause. You are no longer the beneficiary of the Cole family trust. Upon Desmond's passing, the assets will now go to the secondary contingent beneficiary. Who, Keisha demanded. Who gets my inheritance? I smiled. It was a cold smile, but it felt just. The United Negro College Fund, I said, and a scholarship program for young engineers from underprivileged backgrounds. Keisha looked at me with hatred. Pure, unadulterated hatred. You planned this. You set us up. I did not set you up, Keisha, I said, my voice rising. I set up a safety net. You are the one who brought the knife to cut it. You are the one who tried to declare me insane. You are the one who tried to lock me away. All I did was let you walk into the trap you built for yourself. Brad was hyperventilating now. He was loosening his tie, gasping for air. We have to fix this, he choked out. Desmond, Mr. Cole, please, the bank, if they press charges. I have a license. I am a real estate agent. I will lose my license. I will go to jail. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had called me a senile old fool less than 24 hours ago. You should have thought about that before you turned my wife's picture face down, I said. Rosenberg closed the black binder. The bank has already been notified of the irregularity, he said. They are obligated by law to file a suspicious activity report. The investigation is out of our hands. It is between you and the federal government now. But I said, stepping forward, there is one thing I can control. They both looked at me, waiting for a lifeline, waiting for the soft-hearted father to reappear. I can choose whether or not to press additional civil charges for the damage to the house, I said. Keisha jumped up. Yes. Yes, Daddy. Please, don't sue us. We will fix the wall. We will do anything. I looked at my watch. You have 1 hour to vacate my house, I said. I want every trace of you gone. I want your clothes out. I want your cheap furniture out. And Brad? Brad looked up, tears streaming down his face. I want the key, I said. He fumbled in his pocket. He pulled out the key to my front door, the key he had stolen. He placed it on the table, and the spare, I added. Keisha dug into her purse and pulled out the other key. I picked them up. They felt heavy. They felt like victory. Now get out, I said, before I changed my mind about the lawsuit. They didn't argue this time. They didn't try to negotiate. They turned and ran. They ran from the office like the building was on fire. I stood there listening to the elevator ding. Rosenberg sighed and opened his humidor. Well, he said, pulling out a fresh cigar. That went better than expected. I looked at the black binder on the table. The irrevocable trust. The paper shield that had saved my life. I thought about Beatrice. We had argued about the trust 10 years ago. I wanted to leave everything directly to Keisha. Beatrice insisted on the trust. She said, Desmond, money changes people. We need to protect Keisha from herself. She was right. As usual, she was right. I touched the leather cover of the binder. Thank you, B, I whispered. Rosenberg lit his cigar. So what now? Desmond? Now, I said, picking up my briefcase. I have a contractor to meet. I have a wall to rebuild. And I believe I have a date with a very expensive steak dinner, a steak I can actually chew. I walked to the door. You know Saul, I said, looking back. They called me senile. They said I was living in the past. Rosenberg grinned. And today they found out that the past has very sharp teeth. I walked out of the office. The hallway seemed brighter. The air seemed lighter. I was 72 years old. I had no wife. I had no daughter. But for the first time in a long time, I was free. The elevator ride down from Rosenberg's office was the longest 60 seconds of their lives. I stood in the back corner, leaning against the mahogany rail, clutching my briefcase. Brad and Keisha stood near the doors. They were not touching. They were not looking at each other. The united front they had presented for years, the facade of the power couple, was cracking right before my eyes. The silence was thick enough to choke on. I could hear Brad's breathing. It was shallow and ragged, like a man who had just run a marathon and realized he ran in the wrong direction. Keisha was shivering, even though the air conditioning was mild. She was hugging herself, trying to hold the pieces of her reality together. When the doors opened into the marble lobby of the First National Building, reality was waiting for them. And reality had brought reinforcements. Brad's phone rang. It was a harsh, jarring sound that echoed off the stone walls. He jumped as if he had been tasered. He looked at the screen. It was a number he didn't recognize, but he answered it anyway. Desperation makes you answer every call, hoping for a miracle. Hello? He barked into the phone, trying to sound authoritative, but failing miserably. I watched his face. It went from flushed to pale in the span of 3 heartbeats. Who? He whispered. The fraud division. He stopped walking. People in suits were brushing past us, rushing to lunch meetings and court hearings. But Brad Miller was standing frozen in the middle of the lobby, listening to the sound of his life dismantling. I stood a few feet away. I didn't leave. I wanted to hear this. What do you mean, the FBI? He squeaked. His voice was so high it sounded like a child's. I could not hear the voice on the other end, but I knew exactly what they were saying. Rosenberg had explained it to me. When a bank detects a fraudulent mortgage application involving a trust, they don't just deny the loan. They file a suspicious activity report. They freeze all associated accounts, and they notify federal authorities. Brad listened for another 10 seconds. Then he dropped the phone. It didn't break. It just bounced on the carpet. A resilient piece of technology for a very fragile man. He looked at Keisha. His eyes were wide and wild. They are pressing charges, he said, his voice hollow. The bank. They are filing a criminal complaint for mortgage fraud. They said the FBI has been notified. Keisha let out a small whimper. The FBI. But Brad, we didn't get the money. We didn't spend it. Attempted fraud is still fraud, Keisha, I said calmly, stepping forward. You don't have to rob the bank successfully to go to jail for robbery. You just have to hand the teller the note. Brad turned to look at me. Then he turned to look at his wife. And that was when the explosion happened. The pressure inside him found a release valve, and he aimed it straight at the woman he promised to love and cherish. "This is your fault," he screamed. He didn't care that we were in a public lobby. He didn't care about the security guard watching us. "My fault," Keisha yelled back, stepping away from him. "How is this my fault? You are the one who needed the money. You are the one with the gambling debts and the stupid startup ideas." "You told me he was crazy," Brad roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You told me your father was losing his mind. You said he was leaving the stove on. You said he was wandering the streets. You said the power of attorney was airtight. I didn't know about the trust." Keisha shrieked, her face twisting into a mask of ugly desperation. "I didn't know he hid the assets." "You should have known," Brad shouted. "You are his daughter. You said you had him wrapped around your finger. You said Daddy will do whatever I say. You lied to me, Keisha. You dragged me into this. I have a real estate license. I have a reputation. And now I am going to prison because I listened to you." Keisha's face turned red. She shoved Brad, physically shoved him in the chest. "Don't you dare blame me, you leech. You have been living off my father's money for 10 years. Who paid for your car?" "Daddy." "Who paid for our vacations?" "Daddy." "You haven't closed a deal in 6 months, Brad. You are a loser, a parasite. You pushed me to do this. You said, 'Let's put the old man in a home so we can live in the big house.' That was your idea." "It was your idea too," Brad spat back. "You wanted the kitchen remodel. You wanted the status. You were measuring the curtains while he was still packing his bag." I stood there by a large potted fern and watched them tearing each other apart. It was fascinating in a morbid way, like watching wolves turn on a wounded pack member. They were not partners, they were accomplices. And accomplices only stay loyal as long as the heist is going well. The moment the sirens start wailing, loyalty is the first thing to die. I reached into my briefcase. I pulled out a small thermos of tea I had packed that morning. I unscrewed the cup. I poured the steaming Earl Grey. I took a sip. The tea was warm and soothing. The scene in front of me was cold and chaotic. Brad was pacing now, running his hands through his hair, pulling at it until it stood up in spikes. "I am going to tell them everything," he yelled. "I am going to make a deal. I will tell the police that you forged the signature. I saw you practice it, Keisha. I saw you tracing his name on the lightbox. I will testify. I am not going down for this." Keisha gasped. "You wouldn't." "Watch me," Brad sneered. "I am going to save myself. You can rot in a cell. You are the one who hates him. You are the one who wished he would just hurry up and die so we could get the inheritance." I paused with the cup halfway to my lips. I heard that. Hurry up and die. It stung. I won't lie. Hearing your own child wish for your death is a pain that has no name. But the pain was dull now. It was buried under layers of disappointment. Keisha looked at me. She saw me drinking my tea. She saw the calm in my eyes, and she realized that her husband had just confessed their darkest secrets in front of the primary witness. "Daddy," she wailed, turning toward me again. "Daddy, please. He is lying. He is just scared. I never said that. I love you." I took another sip of tea. I let the silence hang in the air. I let her hear the echo of her own lies. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Security guard came over then. A large man with a stern face. "Is there a problem here, folks?" he asked, eyeing Brad, who looked like he was about to have a stroke. "Yes," Brad shouted, pointing at Keisha. "This woman is a criminal. She tricked me into committing fraud. I want to file a police report." The guard looked confused. "Sir, this is an office building lobby. If you want to file a report, you need to go to the precinct. But you need to lower your voice or I will have to escort you out." "I don't have a car," Brad yelled. "The bank towed my car. My accounts are frozen. I can't go anywhere." Keisha laughed. A hysterical, manic laugh. "Good," she said. "I hope you walk. I hope you walk all the way to jail." She turned to me. Her eyes were pleading, but they were also calculating. She was still trying to find an angle. Still trying to find a weakness. "Daddy, can I come home with you?" "Just for tonight. I can't stay with him. He is crazy. I will testify against him too. I will help you put him away. Just let me come home." I screwed the cup back onto my thermos. I placed it in my briefcase. I snapped the latches shut. Click. Click. The sound was final. I looked at Keisha. "I don't have a home for you, Keisha. I said, my voice steady. You destroyed the wall, remember? The house is a construction zone. It is not safe for habitation. But where will I go? She cried. I looked at the directory on the wall. I hear Shady Oaks has vacancies, I said. Bed 4B is available. The food tastes like cardboard, but I hear the bingo is exciting. I turned and walked toward the revolving doors. Desmond, wait! Brad yelled, running after me. You can't leave us here. The police are coming. What do we tell them? Tell them the truth, I said without stopping. It will be a novel experience for both of you. I pushed through the glass doors and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The sun was high in the sky. The city was bustling with honest people earning honest livings. Behind me through the glass, I saw Brad slump against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. I saw Keisha screaming at him, kicking his legs with her expensive heels. They were devouring each other. The greed that had bound them together was now the acid dissolving their bond. I walked to the curb where Jamal was waiting. He opened the door. Everything okay, Mr. Cole? He asked, looking at the commotion in the lobby. I smiled. Better than okay, Jamal. Justice is being served. And for the first time in years, I didn't have to pay for the meal. We pulled away into traffic. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly how that movie ended. And frankly, I had better things to do. I had a wall to rebuild, and this time I was going to build it without a door for them to walk through. The wheels of justice usually turn slowly, but when a bank is defrauded, they spin with terrifying speed. It took less than 3 weeks for the empire Brad and Keisha built on debt to crumble into dust. I did not go to the court hearing. I did not need to see the judge bang the gavel. Rosenberg went in my place. He called me afterwards while I was sanding the new drywall in my living room. It is done, Desmond, he said. The judge was not amused. Since they admitted to the forgery in the deposition to avoid jail time, the bank went for the jugular. They are seizing everything. Their house, the Audi, the accounts, even Keisha's jewelry collection, which apparently was bought on credit cards that are now in default. I hung up the phone and looked at my wall. It was smooth again. White. Clean. The scar was healing. For them, the scar was just opening up. I spent the next few days working in the garden. I planted hydrangeas where Keisha had once told me to rip out the bushes because they looked old-fashioned. Every shovel of dirt felt like reclaiming a piece of my soul. I didn't think about them. I didn't check their social media. I assumed they were staying with friends or at a hotel. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday night. It was raining hard, the kind of heavy Atlanta rain that turns the streets into rivers. I was sitting in my wingback chair reading a book on bridge architecture. The fireplace was crackling warm and inviting. The house smelled of cedar wood and peace. Then came the knock. It wasn't the arrogant pounding of the police raid or the entitled ringing of the doorbell they used to do. It was a weak, desperate tapping, like a bird hitting the glass. I knew who it was before I opened the door. I could feel their desperation through the wood. I took my time. I placed a bookmark in my book. I put on my slippers. I walked to the door, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. My roof, the roof they tried to steal. I opened the door. The porch light flickered, illuminating 2 figures that looked like wet stray dogs. Brad was wearing a t-shirt and jeans that were soaked through. He didn't have a jacket. He didn't have his expensive watch. He looked smaller somehow, as if his ego had been the only thing padding his frame. Keisha was shivering, clutching a plastic garbage bag that contained, I assumed, everything she had left in the world. They stood there in the driving rainwater, dripping from their noses, looking up at me. Daddy, Keisha whispered. Her voice was cracked and hoarse. I didn't invite them in. I stood in the doorway, blocking the warmth of the house with my body. What do you want? I asked. We have nowhere to go, Brad said. He didn't look me in the eye. He looked at my slippers. The bank took the house this morning. They changed the locks. They put our furniture on the curb, Desmond. It is all gone. I looked at the plastic bag in Keisha's hand. And your friends, I asked. The ones you drank my champagne with. Brad let out a bitter laugh. They stopped answering our calls the minute the news hit. Mike blocked my number. So you came here, I said. To the museum. To the place you wanted to destroy. Keisha stepped forward, reaching out a wet hand to touch my arm. I pulled back. Daddy, please, she sobbed. We are sorry. We know we messed up. We know we were wrong, but we are family. You can't let us sleep on the street. We will stay in the basement, Brad added quickly. We won't bother you. We will be quiet. I will do the yard work. I will fix the gutters. Just give us a corner. Please, Mr. Cole, I am begging you. He dropped to his knees. It was a shocking sight. Brad Miller, the man who had called me a senile old fool, kneeling on my welcome mat in a puddle of rainwater. He clasped his hands together in a prayer of supplication. "Please," he choked out. "I have nothing. I am ruined." I looked down at him. I looked at Keisha, who was weeping silently beside him. I should have felt pity. A father should feel pity when his child is suffering. I searched my heart for it, I really did. I looked for that spark of compassion that Beatrice always had. But all I found was a memory. I remembered the dinner. I remembered the taste of that steak. That gray, overcooked shoe leather. I remembered how my jaw ached trying to chew it. I remembered the way they watched me struggling, waiting for me to choke. They hadn't just served me bad food, they had served me contempt. They had sat there drinking fine wine while feeding me garbage. They had looked at me not as a human being, but as a nuisance to be managed. I remembered Brad's laugh when he said, "The old man is gone." I remembered Keisha's smile when she swung the sledgehammer at my wall. And I realized something. If I let them in now, I wasn't being kind. I was being foolish. If I let them in, they wouldn't learn. They would just wait. They would wait in the basement like termites eating away at the foundation until they were strong enough to try again. "You say you have nothing." "Brad," I said, my voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "But that is not true. You have your health, you have your youth, and you have the lesson I just taught you." I looked at Keisha. I looked at. "You want to come in?" I asked. "You want to sleep in the house you tried to sell from under me?" "Yes, Daddy," she nodded, hope flaring in her eyes. "Yes, please." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Do you remember the steak you served me, Keisha?" She blinked, confused by the question. The steak?" "It was tough," I said. "It was cold. It was hard to swallow. But I ate it. I ate it because I thought you were trying. I thought you cared." I paused, letting the thunder roll overhead. "But you didn't care. You were feeding a dog before you took him to the vet to be put down." "No, Daddy, it wasn't like that," she cried. "It was exactly like that," I said. "And now you are hungry. Now you are the one standing in the cold looking for a scrap." I stepped back, ready to close the door. "I am not going to feed you, Keisha, and I am not going to house you, because if I do, you will never learn how to feed yourselves." "But we will die out here," Brad screamed, getting to his feet. "It is freezing." "We have no money." "Then get a job," I said. "Get a job," Brad sputtered. "Doing what? I am a real estate agent. No one will hire me with a fraud charge pending." "Then dig ditches," I said. "I did it. It pays honest money. Sweep floors, wash dishes. Do what I did for 40 years to buy this house. Build something, Brad, instead of trying to steal what other people built." I put my hand on the doorknob. "Here is a piece of advice," I said. "It is worth more than the basement. The world doesn't owe you a living, and neither do I." "Daddy, wait!" Keisha screamed, lunging for the door. I looked at her one last time. "You asked me if I remembered the way to your house, Keisha. I do." I pointed to the dark street behind them. "Now you need to find your own way. And don't look back, because I won't be watching." I closed the door. I threw the deadbolt. Click. I threw the chain lock. Slide. I heard them screaming my name from the other side. I heard Keisha pounding on the wood. I heard Brad cursing the heavens. I turned around and walked back to my chair. I picked up my book. I sat down. My hands were trembling slightly, not from age, but from the adrenaline of severing the limb to save the body. It hurt. Of course it hurt, but it was the clean pain of surgery, not the rotting pain of gangrene. I listened to the rain. Eventually the pounding stopped. Eventually the screaming faded. I was alone in my house, my big, empty, quiet house. I looked at Beatrice's photo on the mantelpiece. "I did it, Bea," I whispered. I broke the cycle. The fire popped, sending a spark up the chimney. I went to the kitchen. I opened the fridge. I took out a steak, a prime ribeye well marbled. I cooked it in a cast iron skillet with butter and rosemary. I cooked it medium rare, just the way I liked it. I sat down at the table. I cut a piece. It was tender. It melted in my mouth. I ate alone. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel lonely. I felt full. They had lost everything, but I had reclaimed myself, and that was a trade I would make any day of the week. The rain was coming down harder now. It was a sheet of gray water that blurred the world beyond my porch. Brad and Keisha stood there shivering. Their expensive clothes were ruined. The water was dripping off Brad's nose and running down Keisha's cheeks, mixing with her mascara until she looked like a weeping clown. They were waiting for me to crack. They were waiting for the father in me to override the judge. They were banking on the history we shared. The birthday parties, the graduation ceremonies, the times I fixed her bicycle. They thought those memories were currency they could spend to buy their way out of this disaster. But they had spent that currency long ago. They had spent it when they turned my wife's picture face down. They had spent it when they swung a sledgehammer at my wall. "Daddy, please," Keisha whimpered. Her teeth were chattering. "Just for one night. We will leave in the morning. We just need to dry off. We need to charge our phones. We need to figure out our next move." I leaned against the door frame. I did not step back to let them in. I stood like a sentinel. "Your next move is not my problem, Keisha," I said, "and neither is your comfort. You had a warm house. You had a dry bed. You gambled them away on a scheme to rob an old man." Brad wiped the water from his eyes. He tried to summon a shred of his old arrogance, but it was gone, washed away by the storm. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice shaking, "be reasonable. You can't leave us out here. The police are looking for us. If they find us on the street looking like this—" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had called me incompetent. "That is exactly why you cannot come in," I said. "What do you mean?" Keisha asked. "I mean I am an old man," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I value my peace. I value my quiet. And most importantly, I value my reputation as a law-abiding citizen." I took a step forward, forcing them to take a step back into the rain. "I cannot harbor criminals in my house," I said. Keisha gasped. "We are not criminals, Daddy. We haven't been convicted yet." I laughed. It was a dry sound that had no humor in it. "The FBI is investigating you for bank fraud, Keisha. You admitted to forgery. You destroyed a historic landmark. You are walking felonies. If I let you in, I become an accessory. I become someone aiding and abetting fugitives." I looked at Brad. "I built this house on a foundation of integrity. I will not let you turn it into a hideout." Brad looked at the ground. He knew I was right. He knew he had no argument left. "But we have nowhere to go," he whispered. "We have no money for a hotel. Our cards are declined. Our friends won't answer. We are hungry, Desmond." "Hunger is a powerful teacher," I said. "It clears the mind." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I felt the envelope I had prepared earlier that afternoon. I knew they would come. I knew exactly how this script would play out because greedy people are predictable. When they hit rock bottom, they always run back to the source they tried to dry up. "I have something for you," I said. I pulled out the thick manila envelope. Brad's eyes lit up. He saw the envelope, and he saw salvation. He thought it was cash. He thought it was a check. He thought the old fool had finally caved and was giving them a handout to make the problem go away. Keisha reached out her hand, trembling with anticipation. "Thank you, Daddy," she sobbed. "I knew you wouldn't let us down. I knew you still loved us." I placed the envelope in her wet hand. It was heavy. "Use it wisely," I said. "It is more valuable than money." Keisha tore open the flap. She didn't care about the rain getting inside. She reached in, expecting to feel the crisp texture of $100 bills. Instead, her hand pulled out a folded stack of papers and a small hardback book. She stared at them confused. The rain plastered the papers to her hand. "What is this?" she asked, looking up at me. I pointed to the papers. "That is a list," I said. "I printed it from the city website this morning. It is a list of every homeless shelter in the greater Atlanta area. I highlighted the ones that accept couples. I also circled the soup kitchens that serve breakfast before 7 a.m. Brad looked over her shoulder. His face fell. "Shelters," he muttered. "You are sending us to a shelter. It is a roof," I said. "It is dry, and the food is hot. It is more than you offered me. You offered me a bed in a room that smelled of urine and despair. These places are run by good people." Keisha pulled out the book. It was an old book. The cover was worn. The title was faded, but still legible in gold letters. The Book of Virtues. She looked at the book, and then she looked at me. Her face crumpled. "Mom's book," she whispered. "Yes," I said. "Your mother used to read that to you every night when you were 10 years old. She tried to teach you about honesty, about compassion, about hard work." I looked at her with pity, not for her situation, but for who she had become. "You must have fallen asleep during those lessons, Keisha. I thought you might want to read it again. You have plenty of time now." Keisha clutched the book to her chest. She started to cry harder, deep, gut-wrenching sobs that shook her body. She wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because the reality of her life had finally hit her. She was holding a book on morality while standing in the rain as a fraudster. "Daddy, please," she wailed. "Don't do this. I am your little girl." I looked at her. I saw the little girl she used to be, the one with braids and a missing front tooth. But that girl was gone. She had been consumed by the woman standing in front of me. "My little girl would never have tried to declare me insane," I said softly. "My little girl would never have turned her back on me. You are not her. You are a stranger who happens to have her name." I stepped back. I took hold of the heavy oak door. "Goodbye, Keisha," I said. "Desmond, wait!" Brad yelled, stepping forward. I looked at him. I gave him the coldest look I had ever given another human being. "Mr. Miller," I said, "you are trespassing. If you are not off my property in 2 minutes, I will call the police. And I don't think you want to talk to them right now." Brad froze. He looked at the door. He looked at the warm light spilling out from the hallway. And then he looked at the dark, wet street. He grabbed Keisha's arm. "Come on," he muttered, pulling her away. "Let's go." He means it. Keisha resisted for a second, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Daddy." I didn't answer. I began to close the door. I watched the gap narrow. I watched their faces disappear. I watched the rain disappear. The heavy door slammed shut. The sound was solid, final, like a gavel hitting a block. I turned the deadbolt. Click. I slid the chain lock into place. The metal rattled and then held firm. I stood there in the hallway for a moment. My hand was still on the wood. I listened. I could hear them screaming at each other outside. I could hear Keisha wailing. But the sound was muffled now. It was distant. It belonged to the world outside. Inside my world there was only peace. I took a deep breath. The air in the house was still. It smelled of lemon polish and old books. I turned away from the door. I walked down the hallway past the photos of Beatrice that I had dusted that morning. I walked past the living room where the wall was smooth and whole again. I walked into the kitchen. It was warm in there. The smell of cinnamon and coffee filled the air. Sitting at the kitchen table was Jamal. He was wearing a clean flannel shirt. He had a set of blueprints spread out on the table. He was drinking from a mug that said "World's Okayest Golfer," a gag gift I had bought for myself years ago. He looked up. When I entered, he saw my face. He didn't ask what happened. He knew. He had heard the shouting. He had heard the door slam. "Is it done, Mr. Cole?" he asked, his voice quiet and respectful. I walked over to the stove and poured myself a cup of coffee. My hands were steady. "It is done, Jamal," I said. "The past is outside. We are inside." Jamal nodded. He tapped the blueprints in front of him. "Good," he said, "because I have been looking at these specs for the community center. If we use the reinforced steel beams here instead of the standard ones, we can add a third floor. We could put a library up there, or a computer lab for the kids." I sat down opposite him. I looked at the plans. I looked at the straight lines and the careful calculations. This was my language. This was building. This was creating. "A computer lab," I said, leaning in. "That is a good idea, but we need to make sure the load-bearing walls can support the server racks. Those things are heavy." Jamal smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. "I already calculated that, Mr. Cole. I learned from the best, remember." I took a sip of coffee. I looked at this young man. He wasn't my blood. He didn't carry my last name, but he carried my values. He carried my respect, and that made him more family than the people standing in the rain could ever be. "Show me the numbers," I said, pulling a pen from my pocket. "Let's build something that lasts." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the house on Oak Street, the foundation was strong, and for the first time in a long time, the future looked bright. The house on Oak Street is not quiet anymore. For a long time, I thought that silence was the ultimate luxury. I thought peace meant an empty room and a locked door, but I was wrong. Silence can be heavy. It can weigh down on you like a collapsed roof. Today my house is full of noise, but it is the kind of noise that makes a heart sing. It is the hum of 3D printers. It is the scratching of pencils on drafting paper. It is the sound of young voices debating the best way to reinforce a suspension bridge. It has been exactly 1 year since I closed the door on my daughter and her husband in the rain. 1 year since I chose dignity over blood. And in that year, everything has changed. I did not keep the house as a shrine to the past. Beatrice would have hated that. She always said that a house is like a living thing. If it stops growing, it starts dying. So I partnered with Jamal. We used the funds from the trust not to buy fancy cars or go on cruises, but to invest in the future. We turned the entire first floor into the Cole Community Workshop. It is a space for young men and women from the neighborhood kids who have brilliance in their minds but no tools in their hands. I walk through the living room now. The wall that Brad destroyed is gone. But we didn't just patch it up. We replaced it with a floor-to-ceiling glass partition that looks out onto the garden. It represents transparency. It represents the truth. Jamal is standing by the whiteboard teaching a group of teenagers about load distribution. He sees me and waves. He is the director of the program now. He wears a suit when he needs to meet donors, but here in the workshop, he wears his work boots. He is the son I chose, and he honors that choice every day. I pour a cup of coffee and sit in my wingback chair, which we move to the corner. I watch a young girl named Maya. She is 16. She reminds me of Keisha at that age before the world and greed got to her. Maya is designing a water filtration system for her school project. She asks me questions. She listens to the answers. She respects the experience. This is my family now. These kids. Jamal. The neighbors who stop by to volunteer. I am not a lonely old man rotting in a nursing home. I am a mentor. I am a pillar. I am alive. But sometimes when the workshop closes and the kids go home, I think about the people who tried to put me in the dark. I check the news. I keep tabs. Not because I miss them, but because I need to remind myself that justice is real. Brad is currently a resident of the State Correctional Facility in Jackson. He pleaded guilty to federal bank fraud and identity theft. He got 5 years. I hear he works in the prison laundry. It is ironic. He wanted to wash money, but now he just washes jumpsuits. He lost his real estate license permanently. He lost his reputation. The man who cared so much about appearances is now just inmate number 7429. He lives in a 6x8 cell. It is not an open concept. It is the smallest room he has ever been in, and he has plenty of time to think about the open spaces he took for granted. And Keisha. My heart still aches when I say her name, but it is a dull ache like arthritis in winter. It doesn't stop me from moving. Keisha did not go to prison. She cooperated with the authorities testifying against Brad to save her own skin. They divorced 3 months after the incident. It was a messy, bitter affair fought over debts rather than assets. She lives in a small studio apartment on the south side. She works as a cashier at a discount grocery store. I saw her once. I didn't go in. I watched from the parking lot. She looked tired. Her hair was pulled back in a practical bun, not the expensive styles she used to wear. She was scanning items efficiently, keeping her head down. I saw a customer yell at her because a coupon didn't scan. The old Keisha would have screamed back. She would have demanded to see a manager. She would have made a scene. But this Keisha just lowered her head. She apologized. She took the abuse. Life has humbled her. Gravity has taught her the lesson I couldn't teach. A few weeks ago, the local newspaper ran a story about the community workshop. They put my picture on the front page. The Engineer of Hope. The headline read. Jamal told me that Keisha saw it. He said she was in the break room at the store reading the paper. He said she stared at my picture for a long time. She didn't say anything. She just traced my face with her finger, and then she put her head down on the table and wept. She hasn't tried to call me. She hasn't tried to visit. I think she finally read the book I gave her. I think she finally understands that some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt, and that realization is her punishment. It is a prison without bars, but it is a prison nonetheless. I finish my coffee. The sun is setting, casting long golden shadows across the workshop. It is time for my weekly appointment. I put on my coat. I pick up a bouquet of hydrangeas fresh from the garden. I drive to the cemetery. It is quiet there. The only sound is the wind in the oak trees. I walk to the plot on the hill. The stone is simple granite. Beatrice Cole, beloved wife and mother. I kneel down. The grass is cool under my knees. I place the flowers next to the stone. Hey, Bee, I say softly. I tell her about the workshop. I tell her about Maya's filtration project. I tell her that the hydrangeas are blooming early this year. And then I tell her the most important thing. You were right, Bee, I say, touching the cold stone. You were right about the trust. You were right to protect us. I look out over the city. I can see the skyline in the distance. I can see the lights coming on. I didn't just save the house, B, I whisper. I saved the home. I saved what we stood for. I didn't let them turn our legacy into cash. I turned it into a ladder for the next generation. I feel a breeze brush against my cheek. It feels like a caress. I miss you, I say. But I am okay. I am really okay. I stand up. My knees creak a little. I am 73 now, but I feel stronger than I did at 72. I walk back to the car. I don't look back at the grave because I know she isn't there. She is back at the house. She is in the laughter of the children. She is in the smell of the sawdust. She is in the peace that fills my heart. I drive home. When I pull into the driveway, the lights of the workshop are off, but the porch light is on. It is a beacon, a signal that this place is occupied. It is occupied by a man who knows his worth. I unlock the door. I step inside. I lock it behind me. But I don't use the chain lock anymore. I don't need to keep the world out. I only needed to keep the toxicity out. And that work is done. I hang up my coat. I walk into the kitchen to make dinner. Tomorrow is a big day. We are pouring the foundation for the new library extension. Jamal says I need to supervise the concrete mix. He says nobody knows the ratio like I do. He is right. I am Desmond Cole. I am a builder. I am a father to those who deserve it. And I am finally at peace. Gravity works. The foundation held. And the house on Oak Street stands tall. This story is not just about a house or a bank account. It is about the difference between price and value. My daughter and her husband knew the price of everything I owned, but they understood the value of nothing. They saw my life as an asset to be liquidated, not a legacy to be honored. I learned that blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. We often tolerate abuse from relatives simply because we share DNA. But toxicity is toxicity, whether it comes from a stranger or a child. The hardest and most necessary thing a parent can do is to close the door when their child becomes a threat to their dignity. I also learned that the best revenge is not destroying your enemies, but rebuilding yourself. My victory was not sending them to prison. My victory was turning my pain into a purpose. By helping the next generation, I ensured that my legacy would be defined by creation, not destruction. Protect your peace, protect your dignity, and never be afraid to change the locks. Thank you for listening to my story. It was not an easy journey, but it was a necessary one. If you have ever had to make a tough decision to protect your peace, hit that like button. And if you believe that respect must be earned regardless of age, please subscribe to the channel. I want to know what you think. Did I do the right thing by closing the door on them in the rain? Or should a father always offer shelter no matter what? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. Stay strong, stay wise, and remember your life is your house. You decide who gets a key. See you in the next story.